Chapter 309. A cold light flashed. The old man suddenly attacked, but Xianxi's reaction was not slow in the slightest. This sword was like a silver hook. After drawing a beautiful arc in the air, it directly cut the old man's arm. The tip of the sword entered the flesh, and suddenly there was a tearing sound. Immediately after, the old man's arm fell from his body very smoothly, as if it had been cut by a laser. Lin Xian was stunned by what happened in front of her eyes. She hid behind Xianxi, maintaining her previous posture. After seeing the long sword in Xianxi's hand cut the old man's arm, her mind suddenly went blank. She could not help but open her small mouth, her face full of shock. That dazed look, it gave people a silly and cute feeling. Lin Xian was so frightened that she could not speak. Her eyes were fixed on the severed arm falling from the air, however. The moment the severed arm fell to the ground, it suddenly turned into a cloud of black smoke and dissipated. It looked like a piece of dried straw paper that had been burned to ashes. When the wind blew, it immediately disappeared without a trace. Xianxi? This. Lin Xian's eyes widened. Before she could finish her words, she found that her body was flying back uncontrollably. Stay there, don't move. After using his essential essence to send Lin Xian to a safe place, Xianxi did not forget to remind her. Then, holding the long sword in his hand, he directly attacked the old man. Lin Xian was just an ordinary person, so the scene she saw was completely different from what Xianxi saw. In fact, in Xianxi's eyes, the old man's skin hidden under the cloak had already fallen off. Most of his muscles had also rotted away, revealing sections of white bones. What kind of person was this? It was simply an old rotten corpse that had crawled out of the grave. If it was just a skeleton, it would be fine. After all, Xianxi had lived for 500 years and had seen all kinds of strange things. Naturally, he would not take a living dead person to heart. The reason why he was so cautious was mainly because the skeleton in front of him was not simple. From the moment the old man walked out of the light door, Xianxi sensed a huge amount of essential essence leaking from the old man's body. But a little strange was, although the amount of essential essence was huge, it gave people a turbid and filthy feeling. If Xianxi's essential essence was as clear as a lake, then the old man's essential essence was like oil on one side and turbid on the other. It was really strange. And because of the essential essence leaking from the old man's body, in Xianxi's eyes, the old man was more like a charcoal that walked out of a fire, his whole body emitting thick billowing smoke. Not long after, the black smoke emitted from the old man's body filled the entire church. In addition, during the confrontation with the old man, Xianxi also focused on the light door behind him. This light door was somewhat similar to the heavenly gate, but it could not be compared to the heavenly gate. After all, the heavenly gate required the support of a huge amount of spiritual energy to open, but this light door in front of him only needed Manager Sun, a pseudo-core stage living sacrifice. If it was another world behind the heavenly gate, then behind the light door was obviously just an illegally expanded basement. There was a fundamental difference between the two. And this kind of illegally built basement was actually a small world or a small paradise that was opened up in the void after immortal cultivators comprehended the true meaning of the word void. What was void? This was a very abstract concept. Xianxi was still at the soul formation stage, so naturally, he could not understand the true meaning of it. The so-called insightful void was, to see the small and see the big picture, to see through the void. My heart's desire, no matter how vast the world is, it is only an inch. The insightful void was an existence above the soul formation stage. Even if it was not as unattainable as the immortal emperor, it was at least a supreme existence and could be considered to be at the top of the food chain. Therefore, the light door in front of him obviously could not have been opened up by this old man who had one foot in the grave. If Xianxi guessed correctly, this small paradise should be an existence similar to the Temple of Time, which was left behind by the ancient immortal cultivators before they left the earth. The old man was just a dove that took over the magpie's nest. If that was the case, then this ghastly old man in front of him. What kind of existence was he? Although Xianxi had a lot of questions in his mind, his hands did not stop moving at all. After cutting off the old man's arm, Qianxi immediately turned the sword and pointed it at the old man's chest. The godly sword Dharma idol drew a beautiful arc in the air. The sword light was cold and piercing to the bone. Like a meteor streaking across the sky, it drew a bright silver line in the pitch-black night. Then, the godly sword Dharma idol sank into the old man's chest and directly pierced through him. From the beginning to the end, the old man did not make any movements to fight back. Even when his arm was chopped off, he didn't make a sound. Seeing this, Qianxi could not help but raise his eyebrows as if he had realized something, so he immediately let go of the long sword in his hand and suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest, ready to make a gesture. However, just as Qianxi was making the gesture, the old man suddenly let out a burst of wild laughter. Immediately after, his body suddenly turned from solid to illusory, as if he had been snapped by Thanos. In an instant, he turned into thousands of powder and disappeared in front of Qianxi's eyes. Qianxi quickly looked up, only to see black smoke billowing above the church, like the sky before a shower, as if it would collapse at any time. At this time, the old man's voice suddenly sounded from all directions of the church. "Little kid, you're a bit interesting. Come on, let this old man weigh how much weight you have." As soon as the voice fell, the black smoke that was originally floating above the church slowly flowed. It was unknown what method the old man used, but the billowing black smoke suddenly turned into a solid substance, and then it turned into a giant python that was dozens of meters long out of thin air. The giant python formed by the black smoke coiled into a ball in the air, and its huge body almost covered the entire dome. Its head was in the shape of an inverted triangle. From the moment it appeared, the giant python stuck out its head, spat out its snake tongue, and stared at Qianxi with its pair of golden vertical pupils. A suffocating sense of oppression gradually spread in the church. Lin Xian stared at the giant python that suddenly appeared above the church, stunned. When she saw the palm-sized scales on the giant python's body, she was so scared that her eyes rolled back and she fainted directly. Lin Xian's fainting attracted Qianxi's attention. However, the moment he was distracted, the giant python was like a long arrow that was shot out from a fully drawn bow, opening its bloody mouth and directly pouncing towards Qianxi's position. Fortunately, Qianxi's reaction was extremely fast. Pretending to be mysterious, accompanied by an angry shout, Qianxi suddenly separated his hands, and 2 rays of golden light suddenly bloomed from his palms. When the giant python was about to bite him, Qianxi was like a llama holding 2 large symbols in his hands, and suddenly slapped out with both palms, ruthlessly hitting the giant python's head. The giant python was formed by the black smoke, and the black smoke was the true yuan that leaked from the old man's body. Therefore, this was actually a contest of true yuan. The true yuan in Qianxi's body was clear and pure, but the true yuan in the old man's body was filthy and turbid. When the two came into contact, it was like throwing metallic sodium into water, and immediately caused a violent explosion. The 8-leaf seal. Chapter 310. The old man in front of him was very strange. Even with Qianxi's experience, he did not know what kind of cultivation method the old man was cultivating. Naturally, he could not determine the old man's exact strength. The only thing he could be sure of was, the old man had accumulated too much true origin in his body. It was so much that it was unbelievable. However, at the same time, because this huge amount of true origin was too turbid, the old man was unable to control the true origin in his body as he wished. Hence, after much consideration, Qianxi finally put down the long sword in his hand and decided to meet the giant python head-on. He wanted to use this to determine the old man's true strength. The Great Vajra seal was not the most lethal move among the 8-leaf seals, but it was the most powerful one. If one were to compare the Great Vajra seal with the most lethal move, the heaven-flipping seal, it would be like the difference between a mace and a long sword. Hence, the moment Qianxi's palms landed on the giant python's head, the giant python was like a train that had crashed into a wall. Its huge body immediately froze in midair. At the same time, with Qianxi's position as the center of the circle, an invisible shockwave suddenly erupted. Wherever the shockwave went, the tables, chairs, doors, windows, and even the steel bars in the walls of the church were all reduced to dust. Dust flew everywhere, and smoke rose into the air. In the blink of an eye, the solemn church had been completely reduced to ruins. Just the shockwave from the collision alone was so powerful, one could only imagine how powerful this move was. The giant python let out a loud hiss. Then, its body suddenly cracked inch by inch as if it was made of glass and gradually fell apart. In the end, the giant python turned into a plume of black smoke and slowly dissipated in the sky above the church. However, although the giant python had disappeared, the black smoke that enveloped the church showed no signs of dissipating. Seeing this, Qianxi's face couldn't help but reveal a cold smile. After this head-on battle, he had more or less figured out the old man's strength. Hence, Qianxi lightly shook his wrist and reached out with his right hand. The divine sword avatar appeared in his hand again. At this moment, the old man's voice suddenly rang out from the black smoke. "Who are you?" He spoke very slowly, and there was even a hint of seriousness in his tone. It was obvious that he had finally realized that the young man before him was no saint. "You wouldn't know him even if I told you." Qianxi brandished the sword in his hand, then looked at the black smoke with a mocking expression and asked, "What's wrong? Are you afraid? How dare you?" The old man flew into a rage. His voice was like a thunderclap, echoing in the black smoke. "Ignorant brat, you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know that even Divine General Tian Du wouldn't dare to be so impudent in front of this old man?" "Divine General?" Hearing this, Qianxi seemed to have heard a joke, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I've already killed a few of them." After saying that, Qianxi suddenly flew up and the divine sword Dharma power in his hand suddenly exploded with a dazzling light. The reason why Qianxi chose to attack at this time was that he had thoroughly understood the old man's background. If he guessed correctly, the strange soul-ferrying corpse infant should have been created by this old man. Perhaps it was because of the lack of inheritance, so when the old man relied on this evil technique to form a fake golden core, he had completely embarked on a path of no return. One had to admit that this old man was quite impressive. He didn't even have a real golden core, but he had already begun to explore the method of forming yuanying. What to do if there was no path? Then he had to open up a new path. By relying on constantly stealing other people's souls and essence to strengthen himself, the old man had actually opened up a path that was completely different from others. If one followed the conventional path of cultivation, then after repeatedly refining the golden core until it was pure and ethereal, one could use this golden core as a foundation to form yuanying. If the golden core was compared to a seed, then yuanying was obviously the fruit of the seed after it sprouted and bloomed. Therefore, without a golden core, it was naturally impossible to form yuanying. But in this world, there were always exceptions. Perhaps it was because of his rich imagination, when the old man realized that he couldn't break through to yuanying, he thought of a method that Qianxi had never heard of before. That was, using his own physical body as a foundation, he could turn his entire being into something similar to yuanying. One had to know that yuanying was just a form of energy. Turning himself into a yuanying, wouldn't he have to turn himself into a ghost? Half human, half ghost? And this was the real reason why Qianxi couldn't hurt the old man. After all, in this sky full of black smoke, every wisp, it was all his fault. He didn't even have a body, so naturally he wouldn't be hurt. Therefore, if Qianxi really wanted to kill the old man, he had to completely destroy this black smoke, not leaving a single wisp behind. Otherwise, the old man would sooner or later use the method of plundering to return him to his peak. Getting rid of evil for the people was a great thing. As an outstanding young man in the new era, Qianxi naturally killed every single one of these scourges he saw, as a way to accumulate good karma. Thus, after understanding the old man's background, Qianxi flew into the sky like a sharp sword. Then, he held the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand and waved it in the air. Suddenly, 7 identical longswords appeared beside him. Every single one of them was the same as the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand. Although the old man didn't know what Qianxi was going to do, he knew that it wasn't simple just by looking at his posture. Thus, before Qianxi launched his attack, the black smoke in the air surged violently. The black smoke gathered in one place, and in the blink of an eye, it actually turned back into a giant python with 3 heads. It coiled in the air and madly flicked its tongue at Xianxia. The 7 longswords hung in the air. The 3-headed giant python raised its heads high, as if it could pounce on Xianxia at any time. At this moment, Xianxia suddenly waved the long sword in his hand, the tip of the sword pointing directly at the ruins of the church. The 7 longswords immediately seemed to have received an order, turning into 7 streams of light and shooting towards the ground. The 3-headed giant python thought that the swords were going to shoot at it, so it let out an earth-shattering hiss. However, what the old man didn't expect was that the longsword's target wasn't it at all. After the 7 longswords shot into the ruins of the church, they suddenly shot out 7 towering beams of light like searchlights that were electrified. The 7 beams of light were slanted, converging on the long sword in Xianxia's hand. The old man sensed that danger was approaching, so he raised the 3 ferocious snake heads and pounced directly at Xianxia's position. But it was a pity, it was too late. Xianxia shouted angrily, "Formation, rise!" A conical light shield that covered the entire church slowly rose in the night sky. Since this old thief was neither a human nor a ghost, and could transform into thousands of bodies, Xianxia could only cast an inescapable net and take him down in one fell swoop. Heavenly Slaying Formation. Chapter 311. The formation was complete. Under the dark night sky, the golden light shield was particularly eye-catching. Fortunately, this place was relatively remote and there were no high-rise buildings nearby. Otherwise, Xianxia would probably be able to see his great achievements on various short video apps tomorrow. The light shield was like an inescapable net, firmly trapping the 3-headed python that the old man had transformed into. The python continuously used its huge body to hit the light shield. However, the light shield seemed to be like a red-hot steel plate. As soon as the python's body touched the light shield, it immediately let out a soft bang sound. Following that, its muscles and scales turned into a wisp of black smoke and dissipated. After a few fruitless attempts, the python could only coil in the air, raising its 3 heads and continuously sticking out its scarlet tongue at Xianxia. A trapped beast in a desperate situation, even if it could not escape, its ferocious and terrifying appearance still made people feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. The old man was in danger, and Xianxia's situation was actually not much better than his. This old monster's battle strength was not very high, but his vitality was extremely tenacious. Because the old man had turned himself into a soul, he could split into thousands of bodies, and every wisp of black smoke was him. If Xianxia missed a wisp of black smoke, then the old man could use this wisp of black smoke to escape, and then continue to devour others. He believed that as long as his lifespan was not up, there would be a day when the vital essence in his body would accumulate to the point where it could not be contained and could only leak out from his body. Therefore, Xianxia decided to take the risk and use himself as the eye of the formation, multitasking 7 things at once, using the 7 divine swords to replace the formation door, thus trapping the old man in the net. This was actually a very risky action. It was like a python wanting to devour another python of similar size. Although the old man's realm was not as high as his, the vital essence in his body was more than Xianxia's. Once Xianxia swallowed the old man into his stomach, as long as the old man broke through the formation, then he would definitely suffer from the backlash. Therefore, Xianxia immediately activated the formation, and before the old man regained his senses, he had to end the battle quickly. He saw that a flame floated up. It blossomed from the void and cascaded down like a world-cleansing red lotus. Although the flame was small, when it fell on the 3-headed giant python, it was like a spark falling on a gas station, instantly setting off a huge fire. The fire was as quick as lightning, spreading along the python's body. In the blink of an eye, the 3-headed giant python was already on fire. It could only twist its body and madly roll and dance in the sea of fire. Then, the 3-headed python turned into a cloud of smoke and dissipated in the sea of fire. The giant python had disappeared, but there was still a lot of black smoke gathered below. Thus, the flames continued to spread downwards. The flames swept over, and the black smoke couldn't retreat in time. However, due to the limitations of the light barrier, the places where the black smoke could hide became smaller and smaller. Soon, the flames caught up to it. When the flames came into contact with the black smoke, it was like a raging fire coming into contact with gasoline, exploding violently. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere, and red light filled the sky. The flames filled the light shield, and the light illuminated more than half of the sky, so that a large cloud of fire appeared in the sky above Zhonghai City. The black smoke turned into a black hurricane, crazily colliding with the light shield. The fire slowly burned from the sky to the ground, not leaving a single gap. There was nowhere to run. No, the old man's desperate voice sounded in the light shield. When the raging fire filled the light shield, the remaining wisp of black smoke could only be completely swept away by the fire. Because this old man's life was too tenacious, Xianxia let the fire burn for a full 5 minutes before he finally dispersed his qi and let everything return to normal. After the fire, the church had long been reduced to nothing. In the burnt ruins, Lin Xian lay on the ground, safe and sound. Xianxia came to Lin Xian's side, and just as he was thinking about whether to wake her up, a wisp of black smoke quietly emerged from the crack in the ground. Because the wisp of black smoke was too weak, even Xianxia didn't notice it. Until, this wisp of black smoke floated in front of Li Xiuan, and directly went into his nostrils. Only then did Xianxia finally notice the difference in Li Xiuan's body. Perhaps because his mental state was better than Lin Xian, Li Xiuan was paralyzed on the ground, and saw the entire process of the battle between the old man and Xianxia. He stared blankly at Xianxia, his eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul, and his mind was blank. Li Xiuan was in a daze. Until the wisp of black smoke went into his nostrils, Li Xiuan smelled something foul, and couldn't help but sniff. This sniff was terrible. Li Xiuan felt dizzy on the spot. Immediately after, there was a sharp pain in his head. That pain seemed to come from the depths of his soul, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Xianxia turned his head to look, and saw Li Xiuan rolling on the ground in pain. "It hurts. Xianxia, save me." Li Xiuan's voice was hoarse, and he let out a barely discernible cry for help. Seeing this, Xianxia shook his head slightly, as if he didn't see anything, and calmly retracted his gaze. The evils we bring upon ourselves are the hardest to bear. With that, Xianxia used his inner yuan to lift Lin Xian, and flew straight into the pitch-black night sky with her. From the perspective of an immortal cultivator, even if the physical body died, the soul would still be there. As long as the soul didn't disappear, it wasn't considered a true death. Especially after an immortal cultivator condensed yuanying, even if the physical body was damaged and various functions died, they could still let the yuanying out of the body, and thus maintain the state of the soul. Yuanying contained the essence of an immortal cultivator, and other than the cultivation, it also contained the immortal cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Thus, as long as the yuanying didn't disappear, then theoretically speaking, an immortal cultivator wouldn't die. But unfortunately, yuanying couldn't be separated from the physical body for too long. The heavenly Tao was orderly, and this was the law of heaven and earth that an immortal cultivator couldn't violate. Once the yuanying left the body, as long as it didn't return to the body after a certain time limit, then no matter how powerful the immortal cultivator was, he would silently perish under the influence of the heavenly Tao, without leaving a trace. Because of this restriction, even though the old man was half human and half ghost, he still didn't abandon his rotting physical body. Thus, if the physical body died unexpectedly, then the immortal cultivator had to find a new body before the yuanying disappeared. This was also known as possession. Possessing another person's body to maintain one's own life. Fortunately, this kind of behavior would be restricted by the heavenly Tao. An immortal cultivator could only possess another body once in their lifetime, and if they forcefully attempted a second time, they would only die tragically. At the same time, the side effects of possessing another person's body were huge. If an immortal cultivator was compared to a car, then their physical body would be the outer shell of the car, and the yuanying would be the engine. The old man used to own a Lamborghini, but because of a car accident, the body of the car was smashed into scrap metal, so he could only take out the engine and find a new body. If he could find a Lamborghini of the same model and install his engine, then he would naturally be able to unleash 100% of its power. But the problem was, everyone was a Lamborghini, so why would he let someone else possess his body? If he couldn't find a Lamborghini of the same model, for example, if he installed the Lamborghini's engine on a Wuling Hongguang, even if the car could run, it would definitely not be able to unleash its original power. It might even cause irreversible damage to the engine because the various parts didn't match. Thus, unless they were at the end of their rope, immortal cultivators wouldn't choose to possess another person's body. The old man's injuries were too severe, and he had no other choice, so he chose Li Xiuwen. If it was in the past, Qin Shi would definitely save Li Xiuwen for old time's sake. But his actions today had angered Qin Shi, so naturally, Qin Shi couldn't help him. Possession was a life and death game in itself. The strong would live, and the weak would die. The old man was only left with a remnant soul, and Li Xiuwen wasn't an ordinary person without any cultivation. Since they were on par, then let them fight it out. Anyway, no matter who survived in the end, that body wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Qin Shi left. Li Xiuwen lay on the ground, struggling in pain. At this moment, a series of urgent sirens suddenly sounded under the dark night sky. More than 10 A6 cars surrounded the ruins of the church. Chapter 312. By the time Lin Xian woke up, it was already 2:00 in the morning. Lin Xian covered her head and looked around before realizing that she was already home. Qin Shi? After subconsciously calling out this name, Lin Xian quickly sat up from the sofa. Immediately after, an indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. Could it be? Is he a superhero hidden in human society? Superman? Batman? An otherworldly expert who vanquished demons and defended the Tao, who acted in a chivalrous and righteous manner but did not leave his name behind? Lin Xian saw too many things tonight that were beyond her imagination, so even after waking up, she still felt like she was living in a dream. For a moment, she couldn't tell if this was reality or a dream. Just as Lin Xian was sitting on the sofa thinking, Qin Shi suddenly walked out of the kitchen with a bowl of porridge. "You're awake? You were frightened just now, so I made you a bowl of walnut porridge. It has the effect of calming the mind and nourishing the brain, try it." While speaking, Qin Shi handed the bowl to Lin Xian. After Lin Xian took the bowl in a daze, Qin Shi smiled and said, "There's more in the pot, you just need to heat it up tomorrow morning." "Okay. Thank you." The atmosphere in the room was a little strange, which also made Qin Shi feel a little uncomfortable. Looking at Lin Xian's blank expression, Qin Shi didn't know what to say now. So after thinking about it, he was ready to leave. "Well, even if you're fine, you should rest well, I should go back." Qin Shi had already reported the situation to Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying wanted him to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. After all, what happened tonight was too strange. If Lin Xian woke up without a shadow by her side, she would probably be very scared, so Qin Ruoying told Qin Shi to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. Now that she was awake and the porridge was cooked, Qin Shi naturally had to go home to report. "Oh, right, the amulet from before was broken, so I made you a new one. You should wear it, it'll protect you." After that, Qin Shi smiled and winked at her. "I'm going, call me if you need anything." Qin Shi left. After the soft sound of the door closing, Lin Xian was like a robot that had been powered up. She suddenly jumped up from the sofa. "Qin Shi, wait," Lin Xian quickly chased after him. But when she walked out of the door, there was already no one in the hallway. Looking at the empty hallway, Lin Xian suddenly had a dazed expression on her face. Just like Mrs. Xianglin who had lost her soul, she walked back into the house in a daze. When she saw the necklace on the coffee table, Lin Xian's face lit up again. This was a new style necklace. Although she didn't know what material it was made of, it looked very good. At least it was much better than the inferior Guanyin statue she used to wear. Lin Xian put the necklace on her neck, then carefully touched the pendant on the necklace with her hands. The pendant's design was very delicate, it looked like Cartier's latest design, but the craftsmanship seemed to be more detailed than the original. She kept playing with the pendant like this. Until a long time later. She seemed to have thought of something happy, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on her face. But there was an indescribable feeling in that smile. As the saying goes, 9 out of 10 things in life don't go your way, but you can't tell anyone. Birth, old age, illness, and death, love, hate, and separation, it's all just like this. When Xianxia returned home, Nian was already asleep, and Qin Ruoying was sitting on the sofa cultivating alone. At this moment, their family was no different from thousands of ordinary families. The husband worked overtime and came home late, while the wife waited silently at home. Because Xianxia walked silently, it wasn't until he sat next to Qin Ruoying that Qin Ruoying finally noticed his arrival. Qin Ruoying opened her eyes. When she saw Xianxia's smiling face, she couldn't help but smile. "You're back. How's Xianxian?" "She looks okay, she shouldn't be too shocked. I think she'll be able to digest what she saw tonight." "Okay, then I'll call her tomorrow. If she's scared, I'll accompany her." "Okay." The two exchanged a few simple words, then Xianxia leaned forward and kissed Qin Ruoying on the forehead before saying, "I'll go see Nian." "Go." Xianxia got up and went to the bedroom. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the little thing lying on the bed with her limbs spread out. Recently, the temperature had gradually risen, probably because of the heat, so in addition to kicking the quilt away, this little girl also unconsciously lifted the hem of her clothes, revealing half of her stomach. Looking at her white little belly, Xianxia couldn't help but smile. This naughty egg, she doesn't even sleep well. After adjusting the little girl's sleeping position, Xianxia gently covered her with the cold quilt. This old house in Zhonghai didn't have air conditioning, so he gently snapped his fingers. As the true essence gushed out, a faint coolness suddenly appeared in the room. Blowing the air conditioner and covering the quilt in summer was a great joy in life, so this little girl's breathing suddenly became much more relaxed. Xianxia sat on the edge of the bed, silently looking at her cute little face. After a while, Qin Ruoying quietly came to the bedroom. You see, it's already 2:00. How about, we don't go today?" Hearing this, Xianxia immediately took Qin Ruoying's hand and gently pulled her to his side. "Okay, I'll listen to you. Tonight, we'll stay at home and not go anywhere," the couple whispered to each other by the bed. The place they were talking about was actually the Temple of Time in Karakoram Kunlun. Since Xianxia got the soul crystal, he would take Qin Ruoying to the Temple of Time every night to cultivate. The 8 times difference naturally made Qin Ruoying's realm progress by leaps and bounds. But at the same time, it also made them spend less time with Nian. Even if it was only when Nian was sleeping. Therefore, after deciding not to cultivate tonight, the couple each lay on one side, sandwiching the little guy in the middle. And because the bed was not too big, the couple could only lean against the bed when sleeping, leaving enough space for the little guy to play around. After all, blood was thicker than water. Even if this thing was immersed in sleep, she seemed to be able to sense that her parents were beside her. Therefore, this little thing would turn over from time to time. For a while, she would put her legs on Xianxia's body, and for a while, she would turn over and put her hands on Qin Ruoying's body. Who knew how many times she had tossed back and forth in the night? On a spring night, the pale moon covered the sky, graceful and graceful. Every time a breeze swept through the treetops, it would bring a melodious and soothing rustling sound. It was indeed a good night to sleep. When Xianxia noticed that Qin Ruoying had also fallen asleep, he was ready to empty his mind and let himself have a good sleep. But at this time, he suddenly thought of someone. It was Wang Shiwu, who was still pressed on the ground by him and couldn't get up. Xianxia raised his head and glanced at the little guy lying on his stomach, sleeping soundly. Then, as if he had made a decision, he gently snapped his fingers. When he left just now, he had already set up a restriction in Wang Shiwu's body. So now, Xianxia only needed to move his mind to trigger the restriction, causing the qi in Wang Shiwu's body to reverse, his vitality to go out of control, and foul qi to rush to his head. Then, his fate was obviously. Chapter 313. When the sun broke through the sky, a new day began. Perhaps it was because of the light rain last night, as soon as Qin Ruoying opened the window, a fragrance mixed with the smell of earth came from outside the house. The warm sunlight sprinkled into the room through the window, and the bright and warm feeling instantly made people feel much better. After a night of charging, the little fellow's sweet voice echoed in the house again. Papa, I want to eat 8 treasure porridge. And shrimp dumplings. Shrimp dumplings. Mama, where's the remote control? I want to watch cartoons. Breakfast was not ready yet, so the naughty little fellow jumped back and forth in the house in slippers. No one knew why she was so happy today. Her little face was as red as a ripe apple, and she looked as if she had been injected with stimulants. Qin Ruoying went to the balcony to collect the clothes, and the little fellow immediately followed her out. Then she tiptoed and leaned on the railing, looking up to see the sun in the sky. What she saw was terrible. The dazzling sunlight immediately made her cover her eyes, and she had to cry, "Mama," uncomfortably. Silly child, Qin Ruoying smiled and shook her head. She hurriedly squatted beside her and whispered a few words of comfort. "Nian, come on, it's time to eat." She came out of the kitchen with a plate, just in time to see Qin Ruoying whispering to the little fellow on the balcony. The warm sunlight sprinkled on the mother and daughter, as if they were wearing a gauze. It was a very beautiful and warm scene. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. She looked at them silently, and a warm feeling suddenly surged in his heart. It was worth it. He had no regrets in his life. After breakfast, the couple accompanied the little fellow at home to read poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. She did not want the little fellow to spend all her leisure time watching cartoons, so he racked his brains to find something else for her to do. He wanted her to like it, and at the same time, it was a very healthy way of leisure. Didn't the little fellow cry to ride a shared bike before? Cycling is not bad. Thinking of this, Shi's eyes lit up. In fact, children of Nian's age should be starting to learn how to ride a bicycle. It was just that they were riding a children's bicycle with 2 balance wheels. Therefore, Shi wondered if he should buy a children's bicycle for Nian and take her to the park to learn how to ride it today. Shi quietly mentioned his idea to Qin Ruoying, but before Qin Ruoying could reply, the little guy who had been eavesdropping immediately jumped up from the cushion and shouted excitedly, "Cycling is good. I want to ride a bike. Let's go for a ride. Papa, let's go." With that, she jumped off the sofa and dragged Shi out of the door. As long as it was something that he liked, this little guy's ears were as sensitive as a radar. But if he called her when she was watching cartoons or when she was angry, no matter how many times Shi said it, this little thing would pretend not to hear it. Shi carried her back to the sofa, pinched the tip of her nose with his hand, and said with a serious face, "You want to go out to play? Okay, but you have to recite the poem that Mommy just taught you. If you can recite it well, Daddy will take you out to play." Hearing this, the little fellow was not afraid at all. Instead, she proudly raised her little head and said loudly, "I can recite it." "Okay, then recite it to me." Since he said that, the little fellow did not have stage fright. After jumping off the sofa, she ran to the opposite side of the sofa and faced Shi and Qin Ruoying and recited it loudly. "When I was young, I left home, but when I was old, I returned home. My hometown accent has not changed. When children meet, they don't know each other. Smiling, they ask where you are from." Although the recitation was a bit bumpy, and the pronunciation was not very clear, at least she finished reciting Homecoming Book. But after reciting it, this little thing stood in place with her hands behind her back. Her small body swayed left and right, and at the same time, she looked at Shi with her big eyes. Looking at her lack of confidence, it was obvious that she was nervous, so she started to wonder if her back was facing him. Seeing this, Shi immediately laughed and applauded. He could not help but praise, "Good, you recited it well. You didn't miss a single word. Nian, you're amazing." Although she did not recite it well, at least she finished reciting it. And, even if she recited it completely wrong, Shi would not blame her. She was a child, so she had to be more confident. It was not easy to raise a child, but it was very easy to destroy a child. Sometimes, even a simple scolding could affect a child's life. For example, that sentence, "You can't even remember such a simple thing?" A seemingly insignificant scolding from a parent was very likely to leave a shadow in the child, so that they would start to doubt themselves and be more unwilling to learn. The psychology of a child was actually very simple. If they could not learn well after studying hard, it meant that they were very stupid. In that case, why should they study hard? They could not learn well anyway. The denial of a parent would only make the child more suspicious of himself. It had to be said that parents who habitually denied their children and forcibly put pressure on their children were really retarded. Perhaps, they might think that their children were like Neza, who needed suffering and encouragement to thrive. Xianxi's encouragement obviously worked, so this little thing suddenly relaxed a lot. Then, she opened her arms and threw herself into Xianxi's arms, giggling. "Papa, am I good?" "Good. Very good." After Xianxi's sincere flattery, this little thing was obviously more active. Like a husky taking a walk, she did not even need Xianxi to carry her. She ran downstairs like the wind. "Nian, run slower. Don't fall." Qin Ruoying hurriedly followed, but she had just taken a few steps when she heard the little thing let out a cry of surprise. "Ah!" Qin Ruoying was shocked. After quickly running downstairs, she saw Nian running out of the building like a wisp of smoke. Then, she happily threw herself into the arms of a person. "Hello, sister." The person who came was actually Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying looked at her with some surprise, then quickly stepped forward and asked, "Xian, when did you come? Why didn't you call me first?" "I said I would call you when I arrived, but I didn't expect to see you go out as soon as I arrived. What a coincidence," Lin Xian smiled and explained. But when Qin Ruoying looked at her, there was still a trace of suspicion in her eyes. After all, they were classmates and best friends for many years, so she felt that Lin Xian was a little strange today. Could it be? Chapter 314. Actually, Lin Xian had always known their address, but because the couple had left one after another, she hadn't visited them for many years. Since she was a guest, she couldn't possibly not even let her through the door, right? Therefore, Qin Ruoying repeatedly invited Lin Xian upstairs, but Lin Xian shook her head repeatedly, saying that she was just passing by to see Nian and would leave soon. Passing by? See Nian? Could she be more careful? Qin Ruoying knew that she was looking for an excuse, but because she couldn't persuade her, she could only accompany her outside the building, chatting while waiting for Xianxi to come downstairs. In fact, the moment the little fellow exclaimed, Xianxi had already used his divine sense to detect Lin Xian's arrival. Therefore, after he packed up and closed the door, he greeted Lin Xian with a smile from afar. "Oh! What a rare guest." That natural action and expression made it seem as if he was greeting a neighbor that he had a good relationship with. It seemed particularly casual and enthusiastic. This kind of natural behavior also gave Lin Xian an illusion in her days. The current him, and the him last night, were they really the same person? Su Shi once said, "A brave man is not alarmed when faced with a sudden attack, he is not angry when provoked." Even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him, his expression will not change, and his eyes will not blink when the elk rises to the left. This should be the kind of person he was talking about. Lin Xian stared blankly at Xianxi until Qin Ruoying patted her in puzzlement, and she finally came back to her senses. "Xian, it's rare for you to come, why don't you go to the park with us today, and play with Nian while you're at it?" As if to hide her strangeness, Lin Xian quickly nodded, and quickly replied, "Okay, let's go. I just drove today, you guys wait for me at the gate, I'll go get the car." After saying that, she handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying, and quickly ran towards the gate of the district. Looking at her flustered appearance, Qin Ruoying was really confused, so she looked at Xianxi and asked, "What's wrong with her? I feel that she's a little strange today. Maybe I scared her last night. It's my fault, I should have knocked her out when I went last night." The couple looked at each other helplessly, and felt that this matter was a bit troublesome. In fact, it wasn't that she didn't have the means to erase memories, but this kind of magic more or less had some side effects. Lin Xian was a friend, so he naturally could not use these methods on her. However, how could she, an ordinary person, calmly accept all of this? If she hadn't been so agitated last night, how could she have done such a series of abnormal actions today? What a headache! Because of the little fellow's presence, the adults tacitly put this matter aside for the time being. After that, Lin Xian drove Xi's family to the mall to buy a pink children's bicycle, and then took them to a nearby park. Maybe because the park was too down-to-earth, there was no romantic atmosphere at all, which led to many young people not choosing to come to the park when they were dating. Therefore, this park was either full of uncles and aunties drinking tea and playing cards, or parents bringing their children out to play. As for those young couples in love, they didn't see a single pair. The children's bicycle had 2 balance wheels attached to the rear wheel, so Shi didn't need to teach it. The little thing kicked its legs and started to move. Who knew where the little fellow got so much energy today? As soon as it got on the bicycle, it ran away without a trace. Nian nian. Ride slower. Don't hit anyone. Qin Ruoying shouted a few words from behind, but this carefree husky didn't care so much, and ran away without a trace. There were a lot of old people and children in the park, and Qin Ruoying was worried that she couldn't stop the bicycle and hit someone, so she no longer had her usual dignified and calm temperament, and could only trot behind this naughty egg, and at the same time, keep shouting for her to ride slower. The naughty daughter ran in front, and the anxious mother chased behind. Such a scene, it actually gave off a warm feeling. Nian Nian is getting more and more lively now. Looking at Qin Ruoying's anxious appearance, Lin Xian couldn't help but sigh with emotion. However, after Shi finished listening to her words, she smiled and said something that didn't make sense. I'm not going to waste my time. Didn't we have a song when we were young that went viral all over the country? What? What song? Lin Xian was stunned for a moment, obviously confused by his sudden question. Only a mother is good in the world, a child with a mother is like a treasure, into a mother's embrace, where can you find happiness? Perhaps because she was too easily amused, when she heard Shi recite these few lines of lyrics, Lin Xian couldn't help but burst out laughing. But then, she smiled and shook her head, as if sighing with emotion, and couldn't help but sigh softly. Yes, a child with a mother is like a treasure. Ying is back. It's great. Yes, it's great. She smiled and nodded, and then stopped talking. The two silently looked at the mother and daughter who were circling back not far away, and for a moment, it seemed that they didn't want to talk. After a while, Lin Xian seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly turned to look at Shi, and asked with a smile, "Oh right. Last night. I wasn't dreaming, right?" Hearing this, Shi didn't want to hide, so he nodded lightly and gave an affirmative answer. No. Oh, after hearing Shi's affirmative answer, Lin Xian suddenly fell silent. Shi waited for a while, and seeing that she didn't speak, he asked directly, "Last night's incident should have refreshed your understanding of this world, right? How about I give you a simple explanation?" Hearing this, Lin Xian's eyes flashed with a hint of joy. But soon, she asked with a worried face, "These things shouldn't be said casually, right? Why not, just treat it as a story?" Then, Shi gave her a simple explanation of the Wu Lian secret. As for the part that involved immortal cultivators, even if Shi explained it to Lin Xian, she probably wouldn't understand, so he simply omitted this part and replaced the immortal cultivators with warriors that were easier for Lin Xian to understand. Perhaps because of trust, Lin Xian didn't feel that Shi was telling her a fantasy after hearing this. Instead, she looked thoughtfully at Qin Ruoying, who wasn't far away, and asked, "Then, is Ying also a warrior?" "Yes, I guess so." After hearing Shi's answer, Lin Xian fell silent again. After hesitating for a while, she asked anxiously, "Shi, since these superpowers are obtained through cultivation, can you teach me? You want to learn?" "Yes." Chapter 315. Fight and Kill? After hearing Chen Shi's words, Lin Xian's expression darkened, as if something had touched her heart. Seeing her hesitant look, Chen Shi was a little puzzled. Thus, after pondering for a while, he smiled and explained, actually, practicing martial arts is quite easy. If you really want to learn, I can teach you. You can just treat it as if you're practicing Tai Chi. Chen Shi's idea was very simple. He could casually teach Lin Xian some basic Qi refining methods. It could strengthen her body and extend her life. At the same time, it could give her more means of self-defense. This could also prevent her from encountering something similar to last night. After all, to a normal person, it would take a lot of mental fortitude to endure 2 kidnappings. After Chen Shi's suggestion, Lin Xian didn't immediately reply. Instead, she turned her head to look at Yingying and Niannian who were playing not far away. Looking at this classmate, friend, and best friend who was already a mother, and then looking at the lively and cute little fellow beside her, Lin Xian suddenly felt an indescribable bitterness in her heart. She always felt that Yingying was like Mr. Chao Shuochin's description in A Dream of the Red Chamber. When she's quiet, she's like a beautiful flower shining on the water. When she moves, she's like a weak willow swaying in the wind. The heart has one more orifice than the body, and the sickly Shizi wins by 3 points. Although Yingying usually looked weak, she was definitely not a pretentious woman. She was gentle, low-key, and reserved. If it wasn't for that beautiful face, it would be easy for people to overlook her existence. After so many years, in Lin Xian's impression, the only time Yingying showed off her ability was probably when she publicly rejected Zhao Yuan's love and threw herself into Chen Shi's arms. At that moment, not to mention Chen Shi, even she, a woman, was stunned by Yingying's actions. Speaking of which, it was laughable. It was also from that moment onwards that she truly began to notice Chen Shi, this piece of gold that had yet to shine. Lin Xian stood there in a daze as memories of the past flooded his mind. For a moment, he actually stood there in a daze. Chen Shi thought that she was thinking, so after a while, he asked with a smile, "What do you think? Would you like to learn?" Chen Shi's voice pulled Lin Xian back from his chaotic thoughts. She glanced at Chen Shi with a slightly panicked expression before replying, "When are you going back to Shangjing?" "Soon, probably within the next few days. Niannian is going to kindergarten. It's time to bring her back to get used to it." "Oh," Lin Xian went silent again. She buried her head and didn't speak for a long time. Because she was half a head shorter than Chen Shi, if Chen Shi didn't use his divine sense, he naturally wouldn't be able to see the expression on her face. Lin Xian was indeed a bit strange today. Chen Shi looked at her in confusion. He wondered if what happened last night had triggered her, so he began to think about how to help her get rid of this shadow. But just as Chen Shi was puzzled, Lin Xian suddenly said this earth-shattering sentence, "Chen Shi, I like you." Her voice was very soft, almost inaudible. But how sensitive was Chen Shi's ears? So after hearing her words, Chen Shi couldn't help but frown. What shouldn't have come finally came. Chen Shi took a step back without leaving a trace. After putting some distance between Lin Xian and himself, he began to think about how to answer her. At this time, Lin Xian suddenly started to cry. Like a frightened ostrich, she buried her head even deeper. As the strong sense of guilt gushed out from the bottom of her heart, she could no longer hold back her tears and they slid down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I like you, just like how the wind flies for 8,000 miles without asking when it will return." Was it wrong to like someone? It was wrong. It was a big mistake. Because she liked a married man, and this man was also her best friend's husband. Mistake upon mistake. But, was this really her fault? Actually, the trajectory of fate had changed the moment Chen Shi came back. If it wasn't for the accidental encounter that day, perhaps she would have accepted Li Xiuan's pursuit. After all, how could she not be curious about a man who could make such an outstanding woman like Yingying fall in love with him? It was this damned curiosity that made her sink deeper and deeper. There was nothing wrong with liking someone. Liking someone you shouldn't be liking, that was wrong. Lin Xian was very clear about this, so she had always carefully kept her heart in the corner, hoping that one day when she took it out again, there would be no trace of that person left behind. When you like someone, but you have to bear the pain and bitterness by yourself, she had already made a big mistake. In fact, it was not difficult to realize that one was wrong. It was just that this mistake was harder to correct than one would expect. From the encounter in the shop window, to the fire in the unfinished building, from the short time they spent together at the wedding, to the despair and helplessness she felt when she was lying on the altar, just when she was most afraid, Xianxia broke through the door. At that moment, just like how she opened the curtains in the morning, the bright and beautiful sunlight shone directly into the darkest corner of her heart. The originally blurry figure gradually became clearer in Lin Xian's heart. This also made her unable to see anything else. Everything in the world was overshadowed. In her eyes, there was only the figure that she yearned for day and night. Finally, Lin Xian couldn't control herself anymore. At this moment, she spilled out her heart that had been hidden for a long time. "I'm sorry, I like you." Like a primary school student who made a mistake, Lin Xian lowered her head and apologized to Xianxia again. Her voice sounded like she was about to cry, but at the same time, there was a bit of sadness, pain, and bitterness. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have disturbed you." When you fell in love with someone you shouldn't have, even a confession would become a mistake. Xianxia finally understood why Lin Xian was absent-minded today. He silently looked at Lin Xian. After a long silence, Xianxia said with a serious face, "Don't say sorry, there's nothing wrong with liking someone." At this point, Xianxia couldn't help but turn his head to look in Qin Ruoying's direction. At this time, Qin Ruoying seemed to have sensed something, so she raised her head and looked at Xianxia from afar. But then, Qin Ruoying suddenly smiled and nodded slightly at Xianxia. They didn't have the wings of a colorful phoenix, but their hearts were connected. After getting the approval of his wife, Xianxia coughed lightly and continued to say to Lin Xian, "Xian, you're a good girl, but you can't spoil things like feelings. Actually, I think you should open your heart and look at the world in another way. That way, you will have new discoveries, and not like now, where you lock yourself in a small room. If I really want to say sorry, I should be the one saying it. I'm sorry, I don't know what I should say now." Looking at Lin Xian, who kept her head down and didn't speak, Xianxia couldn't help but laugh awkwardly after saying a lot of chicken soup for the soul. "This kind of thing really gives me a headache." Xianxia really didn't know what to say. The wind in the park blew gently, and the two were speechless. After a while, Lin Xian suddenly raised her head and sniffed gently. She forced a smile on her face and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot myself. There's nothing wrong with liking someone, but I did something wrong. My mistake was that I shouldn't have said it out loud, because it would make me seem selfish and completely disregard other people's feelings. I'm sorry, I hope you guys don't mind." She said, "You guys," so this apology was obviously meant for Qin Ruoying. When Xianxia heard this, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and quickly said, "It's fine, I have a bad memory." Lin Xian was amused by his silly look. The moment she laughed, she was like a lotus flower at the beginning of the summer rain, beautiful beyond compare. "Thank you. I've thought it through. Feelings are actually like what you just said, you can't spoil them." Speaking of this, Lin Xian reached out and tucked the scattered hair behind her ear. Then, as if nothing had happened, she smiled at Xianxia and said, "I have something to do later, so I won't accompany you guys today. I'll leave first, okay? Be careful when you drive. Goodbye." "Goodbye." After smiling and waving at Xianxia, Lin Xian turned around and quickly walked away. But after taking a few steps, she suddenly turned around and asked Xianxia loudly, "Hey, Xianxia, are we still friends?" This question, Li Xiuwen just asked her yesterday. So when Lin Xian couldn't help but ask Xianxia the same question, the smile on her face suddenly froze. But fortunately, Xianxia didn't disappoint her. "Of course, you're one of the few friends Yingying and I have. Be careful on the road, if anything happens, call me, thank you." After hearing Xianxia's affirmative answer, Lin Xian couldn't help but smile happily. But when she turned around, her vision instantly blurred. Bean-sized teardrops gushed out crazily like a flood that had broken through a dam. After Lin Xian's figure disappeared from sight, Qianxi silently retracted his divine sense and then came to Qin Ruoying's side. The husband and wife stood side by side and quietly watched the naughty little guy run around the park. This kind of thing should be reported to his wife, but Qianxi really didn't know where to start. Qin Ruoying seemed to sense his strangeness, so she took the initiative to reach out her right hand and gently held Qianxi's left hand. I know, Xian didn't do it on purpose. Hearing this, Qianxi couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying with slight surprise, but he only saw Yingying's peaceful smile. Didn't do it on purpose, just these 5 simple words, but unconsciously pointed out a lot of important things. Sure enough, Yingying was as low-key, smart, virtuous, and considerate as always. Thinking of this, Qianxi couldn't hold it in anymore and kissed her heavily in front of everyone. Immediately, Qin Ruoying's face was filled with disgust as she said coquettishly, annoying. I still like you very much, like the wind that flies 8,000 miles, not asking when it will return. Chapter 316. 3 days later. Because of her bad mood, Lin Xian took a week of sick leave and didn't go to work recently. Mental illness was also an illness, and there was no cure for it. Therefore, for most of the 3 days, she just hugged her legs and sat quietly on the sofa in a daze. She didn't turn on the lights, and the curtains were tightly drawn. Only in the darkness could she find a trace of warmth. Although she had never been in love, the lingering disappointment and sadness still lingered in her heart. She didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't control herself. She couldn't help but think of that figure, and that was why she was in so much pain. Time passed by just like that. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. Lin Xian was shocked. She thought that her dream had come true, so a trace of joy immediately appeared on her face. When you missed someone in your heart, you knew that it was impossible, but the moment you opened the door, you would still hope that the person behind the door would be the one you thought about day and night. And this, it was just a kind of self-deception, so she quickly came back to her senses. After all, why would Qianxi come to her house for no reason? Who was knocking on the door? Lin Xian glanced outside through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in a black suit standing outside the door with a serious face. Who is it? For safety reasons, Lin Xian didn't open the door immediately. Instead, she asked through the door. Miss Lin, hello. My name is Qin Shui. I'm Mr. Chen's friend. He asked me to pass something to you. Huh? Lin Xian looked through the peephole repeatedly for a while. After confirming that Qin Shui didn't look like a bad person, she opened the door a little. Qin Shui was tactful. After passing the file in his hand to Lin Xian through the security door, he immediately took a step back and said, Miss Lin, Mr. Chen might not have mentioned me to you. You can take a look. This is my business card. I was asked by Mr. Chen to call you no matter what difficulties you encounter in the future. I think I should be able to help. Alright, thank you. Sorry to trouble you. Lin Xian remained vigilant towards this stranger who was so friendly to her for the first time. After thanking him politely, she quickly closed the door. Bang! Seeing this, Qin Shui could only smile helplessly, then turned around and returned to the elevator. While he was waiting for the elevator, 2 men in black suits appeared out of nowhere and followed him into the elevator. I've checked, this girl is just an ordinary person. You two will transfer a group of people from the branch and divide them into 2 groups to protect her 24/7, understand? Understood. Although Qianxi had already killed the old man whom Steward Sun regarded as his heavenly father, he did not have the time to play hide-and-seek with the remnants of the Zhenli sect. For the sake of Lin Xian's safety, Qianxi simply handed this important task to Qin Shui. He hoped that Qin Shui could protect Lin Xian for a period of time until the Zhenli sect was completely wiped out by the Wu Yan. Qin Shui did not understand the situation. When he saw that Lin Xian was a young and beautiful girl, he naturally could not help but misunderstand the situation, therefore, he valued Lin Xian's personal safety so much. Lin Xian did not know what had happened. It was not until she opened the document bag and saw what Qianxi had left for her that she suddenly realized, Chen Shi and his family had already left. They did not even leave a word of farewell. The only thing in the file was a handwritten draft with a fountain pen. Although it was a draft, it was written in one go without any mistakes. Moreover, the handwriting was very neat. It could be said that the strokes were like dragons and snakes. Lin Xian looked at the contents of the draft and realized that this should be the cultivation method that Chen Shi had mentioned before. There were 2 parts in total. One part was the Qi cultivation chapter, and the other part was the Qi cultivation chapter. Lin Xian looked at the flowing handwriting and suddenly heard Chen Shi's rhythmic voice. It was as if Chen Shi was by her side at this moment and was guiding her on how to cultivate. She did not know why, but after randomly flipping through the draft in her hand, Lin Xian's mood suddenly became much better. Therefore, she clenched her delicate fists as if to encourage herself. She pouted and said loudly, Xian, do your best. Do your best. Even if it was just an impossible dream, she would continue to live in it. It would be best if she would never wake up. Shangjing, Dongming Alley. It was a familiar place with the strong smell of Beijing. The taxi had just stopped at the entrance of the alley when the naughty little guy impatiently pushed open the door and ran out like a wisp of smoke. While running, she shouted at the top of her lungs, "Big cat! Big cat! Big cat!" Her sweet voice echoed in the alley. As if in response to her shout, a sharp cat's cry suddenly sounded from behind the wall. Meow. A black shadow leaped onto the wall and stood on top of it, looking around. That silly look on his face, wasn't that the big cat that she had not seen for a long time? The big cat stood on the wall and looked for a while. When it saw the little guy's familiar smiling face, it immediately ran along the wall. Its movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it was already above the little guy's head. Then, it spread out its limbs and jumped from the wall, directly pouncing on the little guy on the ground. Meow. Perhaps it was because it had not seen its little master for a long time, so this guy was especially enthusiastic. Big cat. Looking at the big cat pouncing on her, the little guy immediately opened her arms happily and made a gesture to catch it. However, just as the big cat was about to pounce on the little guy, a big hand suddenly grabbed it in midair. Meow. The big cat looked at Chen Shi with a dumbfounded expression. But before it could recover, Chen Shi slapped it on the head. Look at you, how fat are you? Can a 5-year-old child like her catch you? While speaking, Chen Shi also weighed the big cat's weight. It must be more than 10 kilograms, right? It had only been a few months, and this guy was about to grow into a Garfield cat, become smaller. How can she carry you when you're so fat? Chen Shi pinched the big cat with a look of disgust. But after the big cat heard this, it could only respond with an innocent face, meow. This guy's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, so its body was getting bigger and bigger. Although it could change its size, there was a limit to this transformation. It could not become smaller than a mouse, right? Therefore, its current size was already the smallest it could ever be. Chen Shi understood what the big cat meant. But when he looked down and saw Nyanyan's hopeful little eyes, he immediately said to the big cat in an unquestionable tone, "You can't become smaller, right? I'll help you." Chapter 317. After Chen Shi's gentle massage, the big cat's originally plump body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a cat, of course, it's better to be more agile. Perhaps it was because she hadn't seen the big cat for a long time, so the little thing was particularly clingy today. When she tiptoed and raised her small hands, happily taking the big cat from Chen Shi's hands, she immediately put her rosy little face on the big cat and kept rubbing it. After rubbing it for a while, the little thing used both hands to hold the big cat and raised it in front of her. Then she looked into its eyes and asked seriously, Big cat, did you miss me?" Meow 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 meow, this little thing was quite sensible. It knew that its only mission was to make Nyanyan happy, so after a few calls, it stuck out its tongue and licked Nyanyan's little face. The slippery feeling immediately made the little thing giggle. The little thing stood there with the big cat in her arms. Xianxia waited for a while, then carried her and the cat, and went straight to the courtyard. Nian, let's go home. What should we do when we see Grandpa later? I know. We have to take the initiative to say hello to Grandpa. Smart. The family of 3 walked into the courtyard. Just as they turned the screen wall and came to the door of the drooping flower, a figure slowly walked out from the main hall. Wasn't that Qin Yongyan who had been away for a long time? Just by standing there casually, he naturally exuded a scholarly temperament, which gave people a feeling of transcendence, as if he was as deep as an abyss and as high as a mountain. Seeing this, Xianxia bent down and put the little thing on the ground, and the little thing bent down and put the big cat on the ground. Then, she opened her arms and ran all the way to the main hall. Grandpa! Grandpa! We're back! The little thing ran very fast with her short legs. Qin Yongyan seemed to be afraid that she would accidentally fall, so he quickly walked down the stairs. Oh, Nian is back. Did you miss Grandpa? Yes. I missed Grandpa so much. Oh, Nian is so good. Qin Yongyan gently picked up the little thing from the ground. Soon after, the little thing happily tossed and turned in his arms. That mischievous look immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh. As people get older, most people would like children more and more. And this should be the so-called generation gap affection. When Qin Yongyan saw Qin Yongyan and the couple called out, "Dad," the smile on his face, Qin Yongyan's face became even brighter. The whole family stood in the courtyard and chatted for a while. Then, Qin Yongyan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly reached out and pinched the little thing's little face. Then, he smiled and asked, "Ying, this child's birthday is coming soon, right?" "Yes, it will be in half a month." Just as Qin Ruoying finished speaking, before Qin Yongyan could say anything, the little thing in his arms suddenly turned her head. The little thing didn't say anything. She just stared at Qin Ruoying with her big, watery eyes. At that moment, there was a timid and expectant expression on her rosy little face. Birthday, for this little thing who didn't have parents since she was young, it was a feeling that she had never experienced before. Although Nian was still young, she already knew a lot of things. A child's memory was fragmented, so she only vaguely remembered that Aunt Zhang would cook her a sumptuous dinner and buy her 1 or 2 little toys that she liked on her birthday. Because her parents had never celebrated her birthday with her, she never felt that there was anything wrong with Aunt Zhang's arrangement. But, every time she played with other children in the neighborhood, she would always hear the other children bragging about how they celebrated their birthdays. "Where did Daddy take me to play today? What did Mommy buy me? How big was the cake? How fun was the birthday present?" Comparing was a very common behavior among children. Whenever the little thing was not convinced, she would pout her little mouth and shout, "When it's my birthday, Grandma will also cook delicious food for me. She will also buy me toys." As she spoke, she waved the rainbow ring in her hand, trying to prove that her birthday was also very good. Nian was very satisfied with her birthday present, but the other children didn't think so. Children nowadays were very smart. Of course, they knew what toys were expensive and what toys were rare. The rainbow ring in Nian's hand was only sold for 3 yuan at the small store at the entrance. Of course, they didn't care about it. It was also because of this that Nian didn't like to play with them later on. Because she would always be ostracized, ridiculed, and mocked by others. "Bah bah bah, wild child. She's a wild child without parents. Don't play with her." Wild child. Perhaps it was because she thought of these unhappy past events, the smile on the little thing's face suddenly faded a lot. Fortunately, Xianxia's eyes were sharp and almost instantly noticed the change in her expression. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Xianxia roughly understood her state of mind. Thus, he hurried to Qin Yongyan's side and took the little thing into his arms. Then, he asked with a gentle face, "Nian, it's your birthday next month. What birthday present do you want?" Hearing this, the little thing pursed her little mouth and shook her head. She didn't say anything, but the little hand that grabbed Xianxi's clothes tightened. Nian Nian, good girl. What birthday present do you want? Xianxi caressed her little face, encouraging her to tell her what she wanted for her birthday. However, the little thing didn't know why. After pursing her little mouth for a while, she actually burst into tears. The sudden turn of events stunned everyone. Xianxi hurriedly hugged her and comforted her patiently. However, the little thing was crying while reaching out her hands to Qin Ruoying. Mama. Mama, no matter how naughty and mischievous a child was, she was still just a child. When her peers were ostracizing her and mocking her, how strong did this child have to be to silently bear all this? Mama, Mama, the little thing lay on Qin Ruoying's shoulder and cried heartbreakingly. Mother and daughter were connected by heart. When Qin Ruoying saw her sad look, she suddenly felt touched and couldn't help but cry. She quickly hugged the little thing even tighter. Nian Nian, don't cry, don't cry. Mother is here, don't cry, don't cry. A child's mood was like the weather in June, it could change at any time. Qin Yongyan never thought that his casual question would touch on this little thing's sad matter. However, these sad things had happened a long time ago, so after Qin Ruoying gently comforted her for a while, the little thing slowly stopped crying. Xianxi stood by the side and didn't say anything. Seeing that the little fellow's emotions were gradually calming down, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. His daughter was already 5 years old, and as a father, it was his first time preparing a birthday present for his daughter. It had been 5 years. When he thought of this, there was only one thought left in Xianxi's mind. I love you, so I want to give the whole world to you. And this was the deepest and most profound feeling he had for Nian Nian. People called it. Chapter 318. It was easy for children to forget some unhappy things, but this didn't mean that they wouldn't think about it again in the future. If one day, they suddenly associated these unhappy things, they might be inexplicably unhappy, or even sad. These behaviors may be somewhat incomprehensible in the eyes of adults, so there were often situations where the children were crying while the parents were confused. What's wrong with the baby? You were playing just now, why are you suddenly crying? Did someone bully you? Do you want to buy something? In fact, the child was just reminded of the past. After all, they were still young and hadn't learned how to control their emotions. Even adults would become very sad when thinking about sad things, let alone children. Only when they grew up would they truly learn to be strong. Under the comfort of Qin Ruoying, the little girl quickly stopped crying. However, this also reminded Xianxi that he must prepare a birthday gift in half a month. After forgetting those troubles, the little girl's face was full of smiles again. Xianxi used WeChat to video call Gu Lao. After a few simple polite words, the two sides of the call became the three little guys. Nian Nian was waving her small hands vigorously on this side, while the twins were pushing and squeezing on the other side, all scrambling to talk to her. When Xianxi saw this situation, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but the friendship between these three little things hadn't faded in the slightest. After they each told their own happy experiences during this period of time, the brothers made an appointment with Nian Nian to meet at the tea house tomorrow, saying that they had a gift for her. Hearing that the brothers had a gift for her, the little girl's mood was obviously much better. Therefore, after hanging up the phone, she happily rode the big cat in the courtyard. The big cat was wearing a saddle, like a black horse galloping back and forth in the courtyard. Nian Nian turned into an excellent rider, holding the reins in one hand and patting the big cat's butt with the other, constantly shouting, "Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up." Accompanied by her bell-like laughter, this courtyard that had been silent for a period of time seemed to have regained its vigor and vitality. Night fell. Above the vast Pacific Ocean, a figure slowly flew over. Then, the figure plunged into the sea like a falling meteorite. This was a deep sea area with a depth of more than 3,000 meters. Xianxi plunged straight into the seabed like a sharp sword. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of a cave at the bottom of the sea. Because of the turbulent current entering and exiting the cave, every time the tide rose, a whirlpool would appear at the cave entrance, sucking in everything around it. When the tide receded, the hole would spew out the things that were previously swallowed, so no creature was willing to settle down here. Such a natural deep-sea cave was definitely a place that explorers would dream of. But it was a pity, the hole was very small, almost the size of an elevator door. It was impossible for a large deep-sea submarine to enter. Xianxia used his qi to protect his body and quickly swam through the depths of the cave like a sailfish. The cave was very deep and complicated. There were many passages connected. Each passage went left and right and connected to small caves one after another. It was like a spider web maze, and there was no telling where the end was. There was no light in the cave, so Xianxia lit up a light ball. Where the light reached, all kinds of underwater plants immediately reflected colorful light. Like a flexible fish swimming through the cave, after about 2 or 3 minutes, Xianxia came to the end of the cave. Then, he directly floated to the surface of the water. This place, it turned out to be a waterless cave. It was like an inverted cup in a basin. Because there was air in the cave, the seawater could not rush in. This was common knowledge in physics that even elementary school students knew, but it was impossible to find such a place in reality. Unless, the walls of the cave were specially processed to withstand the pressure and erosion of the seawater, to ensure that the air in the cave would not leak, and to maintain a stable air pressure, thus resisting the pressure of the seawater. Obviously, this cave had been modified by Xianxia, otherwise, it was impossible for the seawater not to rush in. The cave was about 40 to 50 meters deep, 10 meters wide, and 7 to 8 meters high. The end of the pool was slightly narrower, looking like an egg. Xianxia pushed the light ball in his hand into the air, and the strong light suddenly illuminated the entire cave. In the cave, there were people. Xianxia looked up and saw 2 people floating in the air with their arms and legs spread out. They looked like Jesus on the cross. So, have you thought about it? Xianxia slowly walked into the depths of the cave. As he walked, he said this to the 2 of them. Xianxia's voice was not loud, but after his voice fell, the cave kept echoing for a long time. Cough, after hearing Xianxia's words, one of them immediately twitched a few times. However, he was firmly bound in the air by an invisible force, so he could only barely shake his head. Cough, cough, this person coughed heavily a few times, then slowly raised his head. His hair was messy, and his long hair covered half of his face, but it still did not cover his eyes that were filled with hatred. This person, it was actually Bai Hong. Bai Hong raised his head with great difficulty, and after looking deeply at Xianxia, he said with a hoarse voice, "A soldier can be killed, but not humiliated. If you have the ability, just kill me." At this moment, Bai Hong looked very weak, like a prisoner who had not eaten for many days. If one looked closely, one could see that his body was full of thin golden needles, and he looked like a hedgehog. And this was obviously Xianxia's masterpiece. After Xianxia defeated the 3 people, he did not directly kill them, but used a secret technique to imprison them here. The densely packed golden needles on Bai Hong's body were the legendary spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles. As long as one was hit by these needles, the immortal cultivator would not be able to make the yuanyin come out of the body, and the soul would be completely imprisoned in the body. I don't have the ability. After hearing Bai Hong's words, Xianxia smiled and waved at him, then went to the ice block that Wuxia Xianxia had turned into and looked carefully. After confirming that Wuxia Xianxia would not wake up in a short time, Xianxia turned to Bai Hong and continued, "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Bai Hong did not reply. Seeing this, Xianxia smiled lightly and continued, "The reason why I didn't kill you is because I don't want to kill indiscriminately. I just wanted to ask you a few simple questions, but you didn't cooperate at all. Could it be?" Chapter 319. Bai Hong lowered his head and didn't speak, but the anger in his eyes never extinguished. With his current appearance, he looked a bit like a loyal minister who was wrongly imprisoned in ancient times. At this moment, he was being hung on the city wall by the traitor Xianxia as a warning to others. Xianxia stood on the ground and looked at Bai Hong silently. After waiting for a long time and not waiting for Bai Hong's reply, Xianxia couldn't help but sneer and said again, I don't know if you have a secret method called soul snatching? Speaking of this, Qianxi deliberately paused. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he chuckled and said, this secret method has the miraculous effect of exploring other people's memories. The conditions for using it are very simple, as long as the other party loses the ability to resist. However, although this secret method is good, it has a great flaw, that is, it will bring some sequelae to the person who is to be used. Well, a light case of qigong deviation, a heavy case of the soul dispersing. There are 3 people here, so, who do you think is more suitable to use this secret method on? Qianxi's voice sounded like it came from the 9 serenities, giving people a gloomy feeling. And the moment Bai Hong heard the words soul snatching, his body couldn't help but tremble violently. Not because of fear, but because of anger. Despicable. After squeezing out such a word from the gap of his teeth, Bai Hong raised his head and growled word by word, let me tell you, if I ever get away, I will definitely cut you into pieces. Very good, very good. Qianxi chuckled a few times, and after pretending to clap twice, he didn't talk nonsense, but directly took out the soul crystal from his arms. His divine soul injury had not healed yet. Bai Hong and the others were in a high realm, so for safety reasons, Qianxi naturally needed the help of the soul crystal when using this secret method of soul searching. However, the moment Qianxi took out the soul crystal, Bai Hong's face suddenly changed, and he asked anxiously, why do you have Gui Yao's mysterious crystal? Gui Yao? Black crystal? After glancing at the soul crystal in his hand in puzzlement, Qianxi asked thoughtfully, since you recognize this thing, why don't we have a good chat? Bai Hong seemed to want to know where Qianxi got this soul crystal from. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, this mysterious crystal. Where did you get it? The Siachen Glacier, yes, a place 5,000 meters above sea level. Where? Bai Hong didn't know where the Siachen Glacier was, nor did she understand what Qianxi meant by the altitude. Left with no choice, Qianxi could only ponder for a while before asking, Karakoram, do you know this place? Kunlun. The moment she heard this term, Bai Hong's eyes couldn't help but widen. It was obvious that he knew about Kunlun. Qianxi noticed this detail, so he wisely shut his mouth and kept looking at Bai Hong. The expression on Bai Hong's face was a little uncertain. He knew what Qianxi meant, so after hesitating for a while, he let out a deep breath and said hatefully, fine, what you want to know isn't some secret that can't be told. It's not a big deal to tell you. Later, in Bai Hong's slow narration, Qianxi finally learned some secrets about the ancient times. A long, long time ago, the earth was indeed a cultivation holy land similar to the Tianxian domain, so many cultivation inheritances were born. But one day, the spirit of heaven and earth on the earth began to weaken and dry up for no reason. If the spirit of heaven and earth was compared to a water source, then the cultivators were the fish in the water. Once the water source was lost, the fish would naturally go extinct. The cultivators on the earth obviously couldn't sit still and wait for death. Therefore, leaving the earth to find a place to cultivate became the common goal of everyone. The universe was vast and boundless, it was full of opportunities and hidden dangers. There was definitely more than one cultivation holy land. If one wanted to go from one cultivation holy land to another, not to mention whether there was a map navigation, even if there was a map navigation, could one really get there smoothly? Qianxi was able to smoothly return to the earth from the Tianxian domain. The hardships he had to go through were not something ordinary people could bear. Moreover, to fly across galaxies, one would need to be at least at the soul formation stage. How many soul formation stage cultivators could there be on Earth? This was related to the problem of whether the cultivation inheritances on Earth could continue to be passed down. Therefore, the cultivators of the ancient times put aside their prejudices and united to find a way to pass down their inheritances. Heaven would not let down those who worked hard. Under the leadership of the most powerful cultivator of the ancient times, the Tai Ching sacred master, the ancient cultivators finally found a way to survive, and that was a great world that existed in the void. A great world was similar to a small grotto heaven. If explained from a modern scientific point of view, it was somewhat similar to the concept of a dimensional space. If the universe Qianxi was in was compared to a bedroom, then the great world was the closet in the bedroom. It was closely connected to the universe, but it was a closed space of its own. And this was the so-called great world. The only difference between a great world and a small grotto heaven was that the former was naturally formed and existed in the space cracks of the vast universe, while the latter could be opened manually. Of course, the scale, size, and stability of the two could not be compared. The Great World was discovered by the Tai Ching sacred master when he was looking for a cultivation holy land in the universe. After he brought the news back to Earth, he united all the cultivators on Earth and gathered everyone's strength to open a passage directly from Earth to the Great World in the void. And this passage was also called by the later generations, the Gate of Heaven. This information seemed very important to Qin Shi, but it was a historical event that everyone in the Great World knew. Therefore, Bai Hong had no intention of hiding it at all. Soon, she told Qin Shi about the origin of the Gate of Heaven. This was also the information that Qin Shi wanted to know the most. Therefore, after Bai Hong finished speaking, she looked at Qin Shi, ready to listen to him talk about the origin of the soul crystal. Without any discussion, the two of them reached a tacit agreement. This was a very good start. Therefore, Qin Shi told Bai Hong about the origin of the soul crystal and the Temple of Time in detail. He deliberately spoke in detail, paying attention to the changes in Bai Hong's expression during the process. When Qin Shi said that he had destroyed the soul of the Azure Dragon in the Great Hall, he keenly noticed that Bai Hong's pupils suddenly contracted. There was something fishy. Qin Shi looked deeply at Bai Hong. After telling the story about the soul crystal, it was his turn to ask again. Chapter 320. What was the sundial? Qin Shi raised his question, but Bai Hong did not answer immediately. He looked at the soul crystal in Qin Shi's hand and was silent for a long time before he answered slowly. Back then, after the Tai Ching sacred master led everyone to the great world, he left 5 sacred temples in the lower realm. One of them was the sundial. Although the great world was self-contained, it was still a spatial crack in the depths of the void. It was just that this crack was larger and more stable than an ordinary small grotto heaven. But it was a pity, although the great world was good, it was far from being as stable as the main world. It might suddenly close one day and imprison the ancient cultivators in the void forever. Therefore, the Tai Ching sacred master left 5 sacred temples on earth. These 5 sacred temples used the soul crystal as the core to suppress 5 ancient ferocious beasts and used their powerful souls as the coordinates to communicate between the 2 realms. As long as the souls of the ferocious beasts in the 5 sacred temples were not destroyed, even if the spatial cracks suddenly closed and trapped the ancient cultivators in the void, they could still find the main world through the souls of these 5 ferocious beasts and forcefully open a passage back to the main world. The remnant soul of the Azure Dragon that Qin Shi had encountered before was an ancient ferocious beast suppressed by the Sundial Temple. Because of the nourishment of the soul crystal, the Azure Dragon's soul had not dissipated after so many years. The Azure Dragon was an ancient ferocious beast. In terms of intelligence, it was not inferior to the ancient cultivators. But it was also because it was an intelligent creature that the moment Qin Shi opened the seal, the Azure Dragon attacked Qin Shi crazily and tried to occupy his body. After all, it had been imprisoned for a very long time and its desire for freedom had long been ingrained in its bones. Now that it finally saw the hope of escape, it naturally would not let it go. But the Azure Dragon never expected that what it had waited for with great difficulty was not freedom, but the tragic fate of having its soul destroyed. The Sundial Temple was like a signal tower connecting the 2 realms. Once the Azure Dragon's remnant soul was destroyed, the ancient cultivators in the great world naturally could no longer sense the existence of the Sundial Temple. Therefore, they sent Bai Hong and the others to investigate the situation and also to see where Changli had gone and why he had not returned. At the mention of Changli, Bai Hong immediately frowned deeply. Guoya was destroyed, Changli's fate was unknown, and now even the 3 of them had fallen into the hands of this person, completely reduced to prisoners. Everything was the work of this mysterious man in front of him. When did such an expert appear in the lower realm? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but take a deep look at Qin Shi before asking her second question. Who are you? His question was very general, so Qianxi immediately replied with a smile, "Me? My name is Qianxi. I'm from Zhonghai and I'm currently living in Shangjing. I'm unemployed and I own a tea house. I spend most of my time at home with my wife and kids." Bai Hong wasn't a fool. This perfunctory answer naturally wouldn't satisfy him. Therefore, he immediately interrupted Qianxi and said angrily, "Don't try to trick me. With the cultivation conditions of the lower realms, it's impossible for an existence of your level to appear. Who are you? Why do you want to be our enemy?" Bai Hong seemed to be very concerned about this question. Seeing this, Qianxi spread out his hands innocently and replied seriously, "Why would I lie to you? I'm really a native of Earth. Yes, Earth is the lower realm you mentioned. I've always been in the lower realm, so I don't know anything about your world. Otherwise, why would I waste my time asking you these simple questions?" These words were reasonable and for a moment, Bai Hong didn't know how to continue asking. Yes, if Qianxi also came from the lower realm, then why didn't he know the history that everyone knew? Bai Hong secretly tried to figure out Qianxi's background. Qianxi waited for a while. Seeing that Bai Hong didn't speak, he asked with a smile, "Okay, now it's my turn to ask questions?" Bai Hong didn't answer. Seeing this, Qianxi continued asking, "Let's talk about the lower realm. I'm very curious about the situation inside." As he spoke, he gently rubbed the soul crystal in his hand with his finger. This action seemed to be a silent warning to Bai Hong that if he still didn't speak, he would use force. In fact, the reason why Qianxi took the trouble to ask and didn't directly use the secret technique to search his soul was mainly because his soul injury had not healed. After all, Bai Hong and the others were not weak and their souls were intact. If they also happened to practice some kind of secret technique that strengthened their souls, then Qianxi would very likely suffer a backlash in the process of casting the technique and go crazy. Qianxi now had the upper hand and had plenty of ways to make Bai Hong talk. Naturally, he wouldn't take the risk so easily. It was better to be safe than sorry. Qianxi had a deep understanding of this. Looking at the glimmering light on the soul crystal, an indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in Bai Hong's eyes. After exhaling deeply, he looked at Qianxi and slowly said, "The lower realm? That's a place that's close to paradise." The lower realm was located in a void crack in the depths of the universe and was connected to Earth through the gate of heaven. Therefore, even if Earth's spirit chi was exhausted, the lower realm still had rich spirit chi of heaven and earth. As the ancient cultivators came to the lower realm one after another, the grand pure divine ancestors' fame and prestige reached its peak. If one wanted to make an enemy of the grand pure divine ancestor, they had to be mentally prepared to make an enemy of the entire lower realm. Therefore, the Grand Pure One relied on his supreme power to turn the tide and support the building that was about to collapse to successfully do something that no one before him had ever done before, and that was, he combined the originally scattered and independent cultivator legacies and successfully created an organization called Celestial Capital in the lower realm. The appearance of Celestial Capital was like Qin Shi Huang sweeping through the 6 nations and unifying the world. Under the intentional push of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, the various sects and clans put down their prejudices and learned from each other. They learned from each other and learned from each other. Everyone obtained the benefits they wanted, and Tiandu ushered in its most glorious moment. But it was a pity that this glory didn't last forever. The path to immortality was difficult as ascending to the blue sky. Even a stunning and unparalleled existence like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor was unable to break free from the shackles of the heavenly Tao in the end. As a result, his lifespan ran out and he passed away with regret. With the passing of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital's strength also weakened rapidly and was no longer as glorious as before. However, as the saying goes, a dead camel is bigger than a horse, and a rotten ship still has 3 caddies of iron. Although Celestial Capital was no longer as glorious as before, with the assets left behind by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital was still the strongest force in the lower realm. As the Divine General of Celestial Capital, Bai Hong naturally could not tell Qianxi all the details of Celestial Capital, so after a brief introduction of the origin of Celestial Capital, he closed his mouth again. In this regard, Qianxi had no intention of continuing to ask. Because he had roughly guessed the current situation of celestial capital. The reason was very simple: the world was as black as the crows. In order to survive, cultivators had to strengthen themselves through plundering. If the immortal cultivators were regarded as animals, then from the perspective of such a selfish ethnic style, to create a country or organization with a centralized system similar to that of heavenly capital, that was simply an impossible thing. After all, as consumers at the top of the food chain, cultivators could strengthen the overall strength of the clan after forming an organization, but they did not have enough resources to maintain the operation of the organization. It was precisely because of this that cultivators had always established relationships with each other in the form of clans and sects, and could only huddle together in a small area for warmth. In the end, it was all because of those simple 8 words: natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chapter 321. The Great World. Tiandu. The Tai-Ching Sacred Leader. Although Bai Hong deliberately concealed a lot of important information, it didn't stop Qin Shi from making a reasonable analysis. Thus, when he connected all the information he already knew together, a clear picture suddenly appeared in his mind. First of all, he could confirm that Earth was originally a cultivation holy land similar to Tianxian. However, on a certain day a long time ago, Earth's spirit qi suddenly declined. In order to survive, the ancient cultivators entered the Great World under the lead of the Tai-Ching Sacred Leader. The so-called Heavenly Gate was actually a passage connecting the two realms. The Tai-Ching Sacred Leader gathered everyone's strength to open the Heavenly Gate to the Great World. Then, he left 5 sacred temples on Earth to maintain the connection between the two realms. Although the ancient cultivators had left, they had left behind some incomplete inheritances on Earth. Thus, the ordinary people left on Earth evolved all kinds of cultivation methods based on these legacies, such as necromancers, martial artists, yin-yang masters, and so on. However, it was a pity that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, and because the legacies were incomplete, the celestial realm became the limit that the cultivators on Earth could reach. At this time, the group of celestials trapped on Earth naturally began to think of ways to continue to break through, just like their ancestors had done. Later on, they should have found a way to communicate with the Great World, so there were many legends about the Heavenly Gate in this world. Once the Heavenly Gate was opened, one could ascend. However, they didn't know that the opening of the Heavenly Gate was not controlled by the ancient cultivators. The Tai-Ching Sacred Leader gathered everyone's strength to forcibly open a passage to the Great World. Why would he open it again for 1 or 2 Celestial Realm Juniors? The reason why the Heavenly Gate was so difficult to open was mainly because the spirit chi of the two realms was too different. Here was an example: if the Great World was a sealed pressure cooker, then the Heavenly Gate was the lid. Because the spirit chi in the Great World was much denser than on Earth, there was a strong pressure difference between the two sides of the Heavenly Gate. In the face of such a strong pressure, if one wanted to open the lid with violence, it would be equivalent to bearing the impact of the entire Great World's spirit chi alone. In this situation, not to mention insightful emptiness, even an immortal emperor would find it difficult. Since it was impossible to open it by force, some ingenious methods were needed. A portion of the gas was discharged through the vent to reduce the pressure in the pressure cooker. When the pressure inside the cooker was about the same as the pressure outside, the lid could be opened easily. However, the Great World was not a pressure cooker, and there was no vent on the Divine Gate, so they could only use the second method. That was, by increasing the air pressure in the outside world, the air pressure between the two worlds would be the same. Then, it would be easy to open the lid. It sounded simple, but in practice, it was exceptionally difficult. After all, if the spiritual chi on Earth could reach the level of the Great World, why would the ancient cultivators leave their homes and hide in the Great World? Therefore, every time the Divine Gate opened, it was actually the time when the spirit chi on Earth began to recover. Thinking of this, Qin Shi finally understood the role of Xian Nu. The Great World used the spiritual souls of the ancient ferocious beasts to locate Earth. Similarly, the cultivators on Earth had to use the same method to locate the Great World. With the depletion of spiritual chi, there were no more ancient ferocious beasts on Earth. Therefore, They could only settle for the next best thing, which was to use Xiannu's soul to maintain the connection between the two worlds. No one knew when the divine gate would open, so generations of Xiannus had been replaced, until the generation of Qin Ruoying and Qin Shueching, Xiannu. At the thought of this, Qin Shi's eyes instantly became much sharper. After all, this was an important issue related to Yingying's spiritual soul. He had already found Yingying's soul and taken care of those old bastards in the village. There shouldn't be any more problems, right? Qin Shi thought seriously for a long time. In the end, he still felt a little uneasy, so he asked again, by the way, do you know what Xiannu does? Xiannu? Xiannu was not a product of the great world. Bai Hong had nothing to hide about this, so she asked straightforwardly, you mean Siming Xiannu? Siming Xiannu? After Qin Shi repeated this name, he replied hesitantly, I think so, other than Siming Xiannu, I haven't heard of a similar name. If you want to ask about Siming Xiannu, then I'm sorry, I don't know much about it. This answer obviously did not satisfy Qin Shi, so he immediately frowned and asked, why? You came from the great world, don't you need Xiannu to sense the location of Earth? We have the Sun Glory Temple, why do we need Siming Xiannu? After hearing Bai Hong's matter-of-fact answer, Qin Shi was stunned. That's right, since the ancient immortal cultivators in the great world used the souls of ancient fierce beasts to maintain the coordinates of the two worlds, why did they need Xiannu's soul to guide them? Qin Shi stared at Bai Hong for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Bai Hong out of thin air. Since Siming Xiannu and the Sun Glory Temple have the same function, that means, the former is just a substitute for the latter. You just said that the Sun Glory Temple has been controlled by Tiandu since ancient times. Even if I accidentally destroyed the Sun Glory Temple, there should be 4 temples left that have the same function. So, I want to ask you to tell me, Siming Xiannu, and who is in control of it? Qin Shi floated in the air, at most 2 meters away from Bai Hong. He just looked at Bai Hong quietly, and Bai Hong also saw a dignified feeling in his eyes. Qin Shi was not stupid. The reason why this seemingly contradictory question appeared now was obviously because Bai Hong concealed some information that might involve Siming Xiannu towards Tiandu, and even the entire great world. Qin Shi had a curious attitude, so she did not delve into how much truth or falsehood Bai Hong's words had. However, when these questions began to involve Qin Ruoying, Qin Shi naturally had to change his way of communicating with Bai Hong. Although Bai Hong and Qin Shi had not met many times, it was the first time he saw Qin Shi so dignified, so he very wisely shut his mouth and was ready to answer after thinking about it. Because he also knew that if he continued to be perfunctory, the two of them might not be able to chat so happily anymore. Think carefully before answering. Qin Shi gave Bai Hong enough time to think. So, after a moment of silence, Bai Hong slowly said 2 words. Chapter 322. Attention to all bosses, a bug has appeared. The previous chapter has been modified, Chapter 321, the correct way to open the divine gate. Please review it. Please forgive us if we have caused you any inconvenience. Sorry, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu. The truth was just as Qin Shi thought. Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was indeed the guide for cultivators to ascend to the great world. Through a secret technique, the elders placed Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's earthly soul into the soul mirror, thereby establishing a connection with the great world. There were 2 sides to the soul mirror. One was in celestial capital, and the other was on earth. Just like a wired telephone, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's earthly soul was the most important telephone line. However, Xiannu herself was only a mortal. Therefore, when they became Xiannu, their earthly souls had to be at their most stable and strong. That is, between 10 and 30 years old. Just like an old saying, a person will pass noon after 30 days. Once a person's age exceeded 30, their body's various functions would gradually decline, and they would go downhill. The so-called Arbiter of Fate was the mandate of the heavens. According to the village's tradition, becoming arbiter of fate Xianxia was a very glorious and fortunate thing. However, only the elders knew, even after arbiter of fate Xianxia left office, the earthly soul would not be returned to them. The moment they became arbiter of fate Xianxia, they were destined to have one less soul than ordinary people. If one of the three souls was missing, they could not be considered a complete person. Therefore, every time arbiter of fate Xianxia left office, their bodies would suddenly become very weak, as if they had leukemia. They would be weak all over and fall sick easily. In addition, the effects of the soul recovery soup would gradually weaken, and the consequences of losing one of the three souls would gradually become apparent. Arbiter of fate Xianxia usually did not live past 35 years old. It was also because of this that Qin Ruoying's mother died young. Of course, arbiter of fate Xianxia's function was obviously not limited to this. Through Bai Hong's explanation, Qin Shi was surprised to learn that the arbiter of fate Xianxia had another use, and that was cultivators in the great world could use the arbiter of fate Xianxia to check the condition of Earth's spiritual energy and selectively open the heavenly gates. Other than that, even Bai Hong wasn't sure if Si Ming Xianxia had any other secrets. As a result, after telling Qin Shi everything he knew, he said calmly, "That's all I know. If you still don't believe me, you can search my soul." Bai Hong's temperament was originally cold and arrogant. Now that she had become Qin Shi's prisoner and had unwillingly confessed some things under his interrogation, she naturally felt very uncomfortable in her heart. What's more, even if he told the truth, Qin Shi still had a suspicious look on his face. Bai Hong was naturally unwilling to say anything more. It was merely a soul-searching. What did he have to fear? Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't force her anymore. After seriously considering the truth of Bai Hong's words, Qin Shi turned and flew back to the ground. It's getting late. Let's call it a day. After landing, Qin Shi waved at Bai Hong without looking back, then walked straight out of the cave. Anyway, there were still many days ahead. He had plenty of time to slowly chat with Bai Hong. However, just as Qin Shi was about to step into the pool, Bai Hong suddenly called out to him. "Wait." Her voice was very weak. However, Qin Shi's ears were very sharp. He immediately stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Is there anything else?" Qin Shi waited for a while, but Bai Hong didn't say anything. For a moment, the deep cave was so quiet that not even the sound of breathing could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, Bai Hong's voice slowly rang out from the darkness. "If we calculate according to the time in the lower realm, the divine gate will open again in a month at most, including Changli, for divine generals of Tiandu have already fallen in your hands, so it's impossible to ignore it like before. If you let us go now, I can promise to let bygones be bygones and pretend that these things never happened. Otherwise, what you will face might be even more terrifying than you think." Hearing this, Qin Shi's lips suddenly curved into a slight smile. However, he didn't say anything harsh. As if he was saying goodbye to an old friend of many years, he waved casually at Bai Hong and jumped directly into the pool. They were all adults. Didn't they know what was right and what was wrong? If they didn't have some skills, would Qin Shi deal with them like this? Naive. It was getting late, so after Qin Shi left the cave, he prepared to go to the Siachen Glacier to pick up Yingying from the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But when he traveled on the seabed for a while and was about to fly to the shallow sea area, he suddenly sensed a faint fluctuation of spiritual energy around him. Out of caution, Qin Shi followed this fluctuation of spiritual energy and carefully searched the seabed. This was the deep sea where even the sun couldn't shine. Being in it gave people a feeling of being in the universe. Qin Shi lit up a light ball. Suddenly, a colorful fantasy world appeared in front of him. Fish of all shapes and colors moved freely on the seabed. In addition to fish, there were all kinds of shellfish, starfish, corals, and seaweed dancing in the waves. Faced with this dreamlike underwater world, the first reaction in Qin Shi's mind was, Nian Nian should also like this place, right? Why not take advantage of her birthday and take her on a day trip under the sea? Qin Shi seriously considered the feasibility of this idea. At the same time, he quickly came to the place where there was a fluctuation of spiritual energy. This was a seabed gully about 100 meters wide, like a natural moat in front of him. Seeing this, Qianxi didn't hesitate and went straight into the trench. The two sides of the trench were as steep as cliffs, so as soon as he entered the trench, it was as if he fell off a cliff. The trench was not deep, about 20 to 30 meters. The bottom of the trench was full of colorful coral reefs, and schools of fish were swimming back and forth around the coral. In addition, there were all kinds of strange crustaceans, such as shrimps and crabs. Qianxi didn't even know which species they belonged to. Qianxi simply patrolled around and didn't find anything strange, but that trace of spiritual energy didn't disappear from the beginning to the end. The reason why Qianxi was so interested in this spiritual energy was that this spiritual energy was not the original spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Instead, it seemed to have been roughly processed, somewhat similar to the existence of true essence. Of course, this spiritual energy was far from being as pure as true essence. The spiritual energy was too scattered, and he couldn't find the specific location, so after Qianxi patrolled again, he was ready to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he inadvertently saw a fish hiding in the coral reefs. Separated by dozens of meters, Qianxi and the fish looked at each other from a distance. At that moment, Qianxi saw a trace of fear in its eyes. This fish was actually like a human, and it could actually use its eyes to express its emotions. Qianxi raised his eyebrows and almost instantly understood why. This guy, surprisingly, it was also a monster that had gained intelligence. Thinking of this, Qianxi was ready to catch this fish and study it. But before he could do anything, the fish seemed to have realized something. Like a cat whose tail was stepped on, it immediately drilled into the nearby coral reefs. Its speed was very fast. If it wasn't for Qianxi's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people, he would have thought that he was seeing things interesting. Chapter 323. A fish that had awakened its intelligence. Obviously, this fish was like the big cat. Because it encountered some kind of opportunity, it opened its own path of cultivation. However, the big cat's original form was a leopard. Leopards were at the top of the food chain. Therefore, before they gained intelligence, the big cat's chances of survival were naturally much higher than the fish in front of him. It was just a small fish, not a shark or a whale. Could it overturn rivers and seas? Fish were like rabbits, weak and timid. Even the slightest movement could frighten them, not to mention that this was a fish with intelligence comparable to that of a human. Therefore, when the fish realized that Qianxi had found it, it quickly drilled into the coral reef, wanting to hide as far away from this human as possible. But regrettably, the person it encountered today was not those diving enthusiasts who wore swimsuits and carried oxygen tanks, but immortal cultivators who protected their bodies with vital energy. Even if they were in the water, they were like birds soaring in the sky. The coral reef in front of him was very lush. It was as difficult as looking for a needle in a haystack to find this living fish. But fortunately, Qianxi was no longer the same as before. After this period of recovery, his soul injury had recovered a little, and the range of his divine sense had naturally increased a lot. Therefore, Qianxi, with the help of the soul crystal, allowed his divine sense to cover more than half of the trench in an instant. Wherever his divine sense went, even if it was a drop in the ocean, Qianxi could see it all. Then, Qianxi found the fish in the deepest part of the coral reef. At this time, he finally saw the fish's appearance. This was a typical deep-sea fish, so its appearance was very different from river fish and shallow-sea fish. Because it lived in the dark seabed all year round, the characteristics of deep-sea fish were usually a big mouth, big eyes, and a certain part of its body had a light-emitting device. Through the light-emitting device, they could emit light to lure prey, and at the same time, attract mates and reproduce. Most of the deep-sea fish had strange shapes, and Qianxi had not deliberately studied the species of deep-sea fish. But when he saw the fish's appearance clearly, the name of this fish appeared in his mind in an instant, and that was anglerfish. The name sounded complicated, but in fact, it referred to the kind of fish with a lantern on its head. It was also because of the lantern on its head that this fish was often called the anglerfish. There were many species of anglerfish, most of which were very ugly and even a little scary. But the one in front of Xianxia was different. Perhaps it was because it was an immortal, so this anglerfish did not look ugly. Instead, it gave people a feeling of stupidity and cute. Looking at it carefully, it was a fish of the Asian anglerfish. Unlike an anglerfish's body it had a layer of golden scales on its body, looked like the protagonist of the clownfish in Finding Nemo. Its body was as fat as a basketball, and it had a lantern on its head. Looking at its silly appearance and its timid little eyes, Xianxia made a decision in an instant, and that was to catch it and bring it back to Nian as a pet. As for fish, although it could not be held in the hand to play with at all times, it could be placed in the fish tank for viewing. Thinking of this, Xianxia smiled and flew over the coral reef where the fish was. This unlucky anglerfish hid timidly in the coral reef, and probably would never understand, why was he so unlucky? In the courtyard. When the little girl was awakened by a burst of a clatter-clatter noise, she lay by the window with a dull look in her eyes. In the courtyard. Several workers were moving a huge fish tank to the steps of the west wing under Xianxia's command. "Mama, what are they doing?" After looking for a while, the little girl rubbed her eyes, and then obediently went to the bathroom under Qin Ruoying's lead. "Daddy bought you a fish, so we have to put a fish tank at home to raise fish," Qin Ruoying explained with a smile. But this little thing seemed to have misunderstood, so she pouted and muttered softly, "I don't like to eat fish, fish have bones." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying was a little dumbfounded. She pinched her little face and explained, "This fish is not for eating." "Not for eating? Then what is it for?" "For you to see." "I don't want to see. I don't like fish." Because fish had bones, she didn't like to eat fish, and then she didn't like this kind of animal. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't say anything more to her. Anyway, she would be able to see the fish in a while. After the little girl finished her breakfast under Qin Ruoying's care, she carried the big cat and stepped out of the west wing door. When Xianxia saw her coming out, he shouted for her to come to his side. "Nian, come, Daddy bought you a new pet, do you like it?" As he said that, Xianxia carried her to the fish tank. This fish tank was 3 to 4 meters long, and placed on the steps of the west wing, it almost blocked the wall. However, when the little fellow saw the dull gray stones and the strangely shaped corals, it shook its head with a stupefied expression. It was obvious that her heart didn't waver. Seeing this, Xianxia immediately put his right hand on the panel on the side of the fish tank, and then said to her mysteriously, "Dang dang dang, it's time to witness a miracle." After saying that, Xianxia pressed the light switch of the fish tank. Because of the refraction of light, a fish tank without lights and a fish tank with lights on were simply two different things. Therefore, the moment the light was turned on, the little thing's eyes suddenly lit up. Corals, shells, and seaweed, these things that came from the sea, under the illumination of the lights, suddenly presented a dreamy beauty. "Oh! It's so beautiful." Seeing that the fish tank was so beautiful, the little girl suddenly cried out happily. The guests entered, but the protagonist didn't appear for a long time. Therefore, Xianxia patted the fish tank, and quietly released a stream of vital essence. At this time, the silly anteater was like a cat whose tail was stepped on, and suddenly came out of the coral cave. "Papa! Fish! Look! It has a lantern on its head." After seeing the silly anteater, the little girl was immediately attracted by the lantern on its head. She was already very excited, but the big cat in her arms was even more excited. The moment the anteater appeared, the big cat jumped out of the little girl's arms directly to the top of the fish tank, and then stretched out its claws to catch the fish. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats ate fish, dogs ate meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. The big cat also noticed that the fish was not simple, so it wanted to weigh how much it weighed. However, at the moment it stretched out its claws, Xianxia grabbed its neck, and then brought it in front of him, and said to it word by word, "I'm warning you, don't touch it. If I find out that you ate it, tell me, do you like steamed or braised?" Hearing this, the big cat suddenly shook its head excitedly. Perhaps it was because it was too excited, its body was trembling slightly. Chapter 324. With the appearance of the fish tank, the huge courtyard finally had one more permanent resident. This anglerfish's head was very big, so when the little guy asked what it should be called, Xianxia decisively gave it a name, Big Head. It was especially vivid. At the same time, it sounded like it complemented the two words, Big Cat, Big Head. Because her vocabulary was too small, after the little one whispered the name in her mouth, she said with a happy face, Big Head sounds good. This is Big Cat, this is Big Head. Fish, you'll be called Big Head from now on. Okay? Big Head was a deep-sea fish and had never been in contact with humans, so it naturally didn't understand what the little one was saying. However, although it didn't understand what the little one was saying, the big cat next to it understood. So, it immediately rolled its eyes in a very human-like way. It was obviously a cat, but its eyes revealed a very disdainful feeling. Such a proud performance in the eyes of Xianxia naturally couldn't avoid giving it a slap. After settling Big Head, the family of three faced the late spring sun and leisurely walked out of the tea house. After not coming back for 2 months, a light layer of dust had already accumulated in the tea house. The couple rolled up their sleeves and began to clean. As for the little girl, she slipped into her own children's playground and happily played with building blocks by herself. However, she didn't play for long before there was a sudden burst of shouting outside the tea house. Nian nian. Nian nian. We're here. After not seeing each other for a long time, the two brothers were not polite at all. After each of them pushed open a glass door, the two brothers jumped into the tea house side by side. Gu Lao thought that the two brothers would wait for the old man to enter before letting go. He didn't expect that just as he walked to the door, the glass door had already bounced back and almost hit him in the face. This troublesome child, seeing this, Gu Lao helplessly shook his head, then opened the door and greeted Xianxia and his wife. As usual, after making a pot of tea, Xianxia played Go with the old man. The three little things were making a ruckus in the children's playground. Qin Ruoying turned on the stereo and played some soothing light music. Then, she picked up a book called Collection of Flowers and sat in the booth next to the children's playground. In this warm spring season, this small tea house hidden in the corner of Hohai had a kind of leisurely and carefree atmosphere. At the same time, it was relaxed and lively. Unfortunately, although the tea house was good, it rarely had customers. Today was not the weekend, so it was not until Gu Lao brought the two brothers home for lunch that the door of the tea house was finally pushed open. He was still not a guest. The little fellow looked up. Wasn't this person Xiao Yuan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time? She didn't contact Xianxia in advance, but she didn't expect that she would, coincidentally, rush over on the first day of the tea house's opening. If I remember correctly, Beijing Normal University is not that close to Hohai, right? Why did she just happen to wander over? Boss. Xiao Yuan had just walked into the tea house when she looked up and saw Xianxia and his family sitting around a tea table preparing to eat. Therefore, she immediately lowered her head in embarrassment. She felt like she was here to freeload. Sister, you're here? Let's eat. Come. The little fellow waved the chopsticks in his hand and shouted excitedly. In fact, since the end of the winter vacation, Xiao Yuan would visit Hohai every day. She wanted to come over and help when the tea house opened. She didn't know why she liked to come here. Repaying kindness was only one reason. On the other hand, it was probably because of the boss family of three. Although the boss didn't look much older than her, he always gave people the feeling that he had seen the world. Coupled with the knowledgeable and virtuous lady boss, as well as the lively and cute little guy, Xiao Yuan always wanted to follow them around and learn from them in detail. This was not homework, nor was it work. It was an attitude towards life. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Birds of a feather flock together. Xiao Yuan felt that she might have met the light in her life. Unknowingly, she was influenced by the husband and wife, which caused her to have a change from the inside out. This change wasn't obvious, but hidden. Perhaps it would be many years later that she would truly realize what she had learned as a waitress here. Although the tea house didn't need to hire waiters, Qianxi obviously couldn't just chase them away. Therefore, after Qiao Yuan repeatedly promised that she wouldn't fall behind in her homework, Qianxi finally gave her the keys to the tea house. From now on, she would be the shopkeeper here. An ordinary and leisurely day passed just like that. Qiao Yuan took some time to go to school to get her suitcase. Then, she once again moved into the courtyard. As soon as she stepped through the drooping flower gate, she saw the huge fish tank and the big cat that was lying on top of the fish tank and kept meowing into the tank. Every time the big cat meowed, Big Head would immediately spit out a series of bubbles as if it was responding to it. The fish and the cat were communicating in a way that was completely incomprehensible to humans. Is this a anglerfish? The moment she saw the fish, such a question appeared in Xiao Yuan's mind. If she remembered correctly, the anglerfish should not have scales, right? This fish, what kind of fish was it? Why did it feel a little strange? Although Xiao Yuan felt that it was a little strange, she didn't ask much. She had already made up her mind to follow the boss in the future. She would see more, learn more, and do more. Although she was only a waitress in the tea house, when she held the keys to the tea house, a fighting spirit ignited in her heart for no reason. The peaceful and indifferent life kept repeating itself. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was summer. This morning, while the little girl was feeding the fish, Qianxi quietly came to her side, and then asked mysteriously, "Nian, come, Daddy wants to ask you a question. Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and thought for a while. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of a reason, so she shook her head blankly. "Think again?" Qianxi asked again. But the little girl shook her head again. Qianxi had no choice but to cough lightly and remind her, "Today is May 5th. Hearing this, the little girl still didn't seem to react, and the expression on her face looked very cute. Qianxi was silent. Then, he suddenly raised both hands, like a child, and shouted very exaggeratedly, "Today is your birthday. Are you happy?" "Birthday?" The little girl was obviously stunned, but then, as if nothing had happened, she turned around and continued to throw minced meat into the fish tank. Big Head opened its bloody mouth. Every time it swallowed a piece of minced meat, it happily turned around in the water. And the big cat was lying on the side, and from time to time, it would poke its head out to snatch a piece of meat to eat. This behavior made Big Head so angry that it kept bubbling in its mouth. This scene made Qianxi stunned. Strange. Nian's reaction was not right, but after thinking about it, Qianxi understood what was going on with the little girl. Chapter 325. Qianxi had discussed with Qin Ruoying for a long time about how to arrange Nian's birthday. On her birthday, he would take her to fly in the sky, travel the 4 seas, look at the land of the divine land, and see all the beautiful scenery. Although the idea was quite tempting, after some consideration, Qianxi finally decided to let Nian live a normal childhood. After all, this was not the Tianyuan world, and Nian would have to go to school in the future. If he really let her come into contact with the world of immortal cultivators in advance, then when other children were talking about toys and cartoons, wouldn't Nian be talking about how high and how deep the sea was? Let me tell you a secret, actually, my papa is Superman. He is invulnerable, and can fly. When he thought that Nian might use such a proud tone to show off to her classmates in the future, Qianxi couldn't help but imagine their reactions. Ridicule was inevitable. Children nowadays were very precocious, and they already knew a lot of things when they were just a few years old. Many children thought that their father was Superman, but reality would always teach them a lesson. How could there be Superman in this world? So they would turn to ridicule those children who always thought that their father was Superman. If your father is so powerful, why don't you save the world? But the more they ridiculed her, the angrier Nian would be, and then she would want to prove that she wasn't lying. After all, she knew that her father could really fly. Nian wasn't lying, but who would believe such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story? Other people's fathers couldn't fly, why could your father fly? From the moment she said that her father was Superman, Nian was no longer sociable, so everyone only ridiculed her even more. She said that her father is Superman, do you believe it? I don't believe it. She must be bragging. Mom said not to play with bragging children. We have to stay away from her. Bragging king, bah. Of course, Xianxia didn't want to see such a thing happen, so after much consideration, he decided to arrange an ordinary and happy birthday for Nian. Even if he didn't take her to fly, Xianxia believed, this day would be the best memory of Nian's life. Therefore, after Xianxia comforted Nian's inexplicable emotions, the family of 3 set off directly. They didn't bring the big cat, nor did they call the twins. Because all the activities today only him and Ying were needed. After Xianxia got into the taxi with Nian in her arms, the little guy's mood was obviously relieved, so she nestled in his arms and asked softly, Papa, where are we going? As she spoke, she looked at Xianxia with her big, cute eyes. Needless to say, her small eyes were naturally filled with anticipation and desire. Papa and Mama were going to celebrate her birthday with her today. Since Xianxia wanted to give Nian a birthday that a normal child should have, naturally, he had to plan carefully. After all, he wasn't the kind of parent who worked overtime all day and couldn't even spare time to celebrate a child's birthday. I'll take you to a fun place. Papa promises that you'll have a good time today. Really? Where is it? Hearing this, Xianxia immediately smiled, and then said mysteriously, it's a secret for now. He wanted to keep it a secret, but this little girl was impatient, so she kept shaking his arm and said coquettishly, Papa, tell me. Tell me. Okay, I'll tell you. Xianxia couldn't persuade this little girl, so after gently pinching her little face, he explained with a smile, today, I'll take you to the big world to play. The big world? The little guy pouted his little mouth and muttered this noun, but a blank expression appeared on his face. Because in her little brain, there was no place called the big world. Of course, the big world that Xianxia was talking about was not the big world hidden behind the divine gate, but the children's paradise world. This was a large outdoor expansion park that covered an area of 150 acres in the western suburbs of Shangjing. Although it was not as big as Disneyland in Zhonghai, it had its own characteristics and could be regarded as a holy place in the minds of children. The theme of the park was forest. So as soon as the little girl came to the gate of the park, she cried out, Papa, there are so many trees here. It was the end of spring and the summer solstice. The park was full of towering trees with luxuriant foliage, and the lush leaves were natural umbrellas. Walking on the stone path under the shade of the trees and looking at the green grass under the feet would inadvertently give people a very comfortable feeling. The slogan of the park was, Let children return to the forest and experience the best natural scenery. Since it was a children's paradise, naturally, a series of outdoor entertainment facilities were the most popular among children. But unlike other children's paradises, most of the children's facilities here were closely integrated with the forest. For example, the climbing net that was commonly seen in children's paradises was attached to several towering trees. From time to time, the children would climb from one tree to another, looking like lively and cute little monkeys. There was no ceiling or classroom here, and the whole forest was a children's activity area. Running freely in the open-air forest, listening to the sweet sounds of birds and insects. Although it was not as exquisite and beautiful as an indoor amusement park, it had a unique natural charm. The park was very large, and the activity area was naturally large. So after the little girl climbed in the jungle expansion area for a while, she was tired and out of breath. Thus, she was like a spider demon that had just eaten her fill. She sprawled out on the climbing net like that. Seeing this, the couple sat on the grass under the shade of the trees and kept cheering for her. The little fellow rested for a while, and then crawled up, huffing and puffing. When she finally climbed to another big tree and slid down the tree's slide, she waved her small hands and threw herself into Qin Ruoying's arms. Mama. Good, fun, I want to play. Qin Ruoying saw her panting and was ready to pull her to sit next to her. But she didn't expect, after the little guy finished drinking the water, he suddenly broke free from her arms and ran back to the starting point, ready to play again. This child, seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only shake her head slightly. Since it was a children's paradise, the child's safety was obviously fully guaranteed, so the couple sat aside and cheered the little girl up from time to time, so that she could play more happily. It wasn't that Nian Nian hadn't used these facilities before, but she still had a lot of fun today. Therefore, when Qin asked her if she had a good time today, the little girl suddenly nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. It was good that she was happy. Only when she was happy, it was considered a birthday. Since it was a birthday, naturally, there was a birthday cake. So, after the little girl had played to her heart's content, Qin took her to the park's self-service barbecue area. After making a sumptuous barbecue meal for her, Qin clapped his hands and signaled the staff next to him to push the cake up. As the cake entered, the band that Qin had arranged in advance immediately came to the little girl's side and played a birthday song for her. It wasn't that the park had never held a birthday party before, but it was really the first time that a birthday party was more grand than a marriage proposal for a child's birthday. Therefore, the area where Qin's family was immediately surrounded by tourists who were watching the fun. Accompanied by the band's performance, the onlookers, led by Qin and Qin Ruoying, sang the birthday song together loudly. Happy birthday to you, 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 healthy birthday to you, have a warm family, Nian Nian, happy birthday. When had the little girl ever seen such a scene? So, she was stunned on the spot. Until Qin pushed the cake in front of her, the little girl didn't seem to come back to her senses. Seeing this, Qin squatted beside her and said softly, Nian Nian, happy birthday. Come, blow out the candles, and you can make a wish, any wish is fine. Chapter 326. Birthday Wish? Looking at the crowd of onlookers, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little dazed, so she timidly grabbed Qin's arm. She looked like she had stage fright. In fact, Aunt Zhang had celebrated her birthday before, but she had never mentioned anything about birthday wishes. After all, she was old and naturally did not know much about foreign culture. In the past, her family was poor. A red egg and a bowl of longevity noodles were the best birthday gifts for children. As for birthday cakes, in Aunt Zhang's eyes, those were just snacks that children liked to eat. Since Nian Nian liked them, she would buy them for her. Therefore, Aunt Zhang did not have any concept of making a birthday wish on her birthday, so she had never arranged for it for her. Nian Nian, what birthday wish do you have? Today is your birthday, so you just have to make a wish now. After you blow out the candles, your wish will come true. Qin hugged the little girl and explained patiently in her ear. The little girl curled up in Qin's arms. After looking up at Qin, she pouted and shook her head, as if she could not think of anything she wanted. Seeing this, Qin tried to guide her. Nian Nian, you can only make a birthday wish once a year. Don't you have anything in particular that you want? For example, if you want to eat something, play something, or go somewhere, you can tell me now. Daddy promises to satisfy you. Hearing this, the little girl seemed to finally understand the concept of a birthday wish. Therefore, she pouted and asked hesitantly, can I really make anything come true? Ahem, this question made Qin pause for a moment. At this point, if the little girl made a wish but could not make it come true, wouldn't she be very disappointed? After all, this was the first time she made a birthday wish. Qin was a little hesitant about whether to make a promise. However, on second thought, she was just a 5-year-old child. Could she make a wish that was so difficult to make? Therefore, he answered with certainty, yes, Father can promise you that no matter what you wish for, it will come true. When he said this, Qin's tone was particularly solemn, which made Qin Ruoying, who was beside him, couldn't help but glance at him. This sentence was, what about the father's promise to his daughter? The little fellow didn't feel anything special, so when she heard Qin's reply, she smiled happily and said, okay. Then I have a wish. With that said, under the guidance of Qin, she stood on the bench facing the cake. Then, she put her hands together, closed her eyes, and prepared to make a wish. Looking at her serious face, the crowd immediately quieted down, afraid to disturb this cute little girl. She didn't think for long before she suddenly opened her eyes and said excitedly, "My wish is, Papa and Mama have to stay by my side forever." After that, the little thing puffed up its little mouth and tried its best to blow out all 5 candles on the cake. A child's mind was not so complicated. She said what she thought. However, it was such a simple and somewhat unrealistic wish that directly displayed the thoughts in the depths of her heart. Xianxia held the little fellow in his arms and didn't speak immediately, but the crowd around them burst into laughter. After hearing the little fellow's wish, a middle-aged man with a child immediately said with a smile, "Silly girl, when you get married, how can your parents stay by your side? At that time, you'll want to drive them away." "That's right. A married daughter is like spilled water. My child won't come back to accompany us a few times a year unless she is wronged at home. If she doesn't come to accompany you, you can go to her. Do you think she dares to drive you out of the house? Hey, they are busy making grandchildren. How can I disturb them?" This conversation also amused the onlookers and made them laugh one after another. However, the little fellow was not happy. She immediately pouted and shouted unhappily, "No. I don't want to get married. I want to be with Papa and Mama. Forever and ever." After saying that, she even made a face with an unconvinced expression, which immediately made everyone laugh out loud. "Oh, your child is so cute. If my child is so cute, I will consider not letting her marry in the future." "Don't, you have to ask the child if she is willing to do this first. Otherwise, it will be too late for you to regret it if they elope. Don't jinx it." The crowd of onlookers kept talking, and the atmosphere was very lively. Seeing this, the little fellow pulled Qin Ruoying's hand, pointed to the cake on the table and shouted, "Mama, I want to eat cake." "Silly child." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying rubbed her head with a smile. "You are a child, but you don't know that your parents have already taken it seriously." The couple looked at each other silently. After that, Xianxia gently pecked the little fellow's face, then stood up and asked the crowd to eat the cake with Qin Ruoying. Good things naturally had to be shared. There were a lot of people, so the birthday girl was only given a small piece of such a big cake. Although there wasn't much cake, when she saw that everyone was holding her birthday cake, her little face bloomed with joy. So many people were celebrating her birthday with her. She was so happy. After eating the cake, the crowd of onlookers left their blessings and dispersed. The reason why the couple chose to bring the little fellow here for her birthday today was mainly because there was a parent-child camping area in the park. Therefore, when Xianxia opened the rented tent by the lake, the little fellow immediately got in excitedly, and then excitedly turned over and over on the mat. "Papa! Come in! Mama! Come in, come in!" At this moment, it was already evening, and the sky was red. The family of 3 lay in the tent, quietly looking up at the sunset. The green grass, the clear lake, the towering trees, and the sound of insects and birds from time to time. At this moment, the family of 3 was particularly peaceful. The little fellow put her head on Xianxia's chest, quietly watching the sunset dye the sky and the water red. Perhaps she also realized that the wish she had just made was not reliable, so she could not help muttering, "Papa, Mama, What's wrong? Don't leave me again, okay? I don't want to be a wild child." Hearing this, Xianxia suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Even with his age and experience, he could not control the sudden burst of emotion for a while. Therefore, Xianxia immediately hugged the little fellow with one hand and Qin Ruoying with the other, and replied very solemnly, "Okay." This warm atmosphere seemed to have infected Qin Ruoying, so she followed the little fellow and leaned her head on Xianxia's chest. Then, the mother and daughter leaned on Xianxia's chest like this, blinking their eyes and looking at each other. "Nian, come on, Dad will teach you a song." "Is it Little Star?" No, I'll teach you a new song today, okay? Then listen carefully, I'll sing it once first." After that, Xianxia began to hum softly. This song was very simple, and the melody was not very complicated, so after listening to it twice, the little fellow could hum along with Chen Shi. Chen Shi's low voice, coupled with Qin Ruoying's quiet and gentle voice, plus the little fellow's clear and melodious childish voice. This song, Insects Fly, which always gave people a feeling of sadness, was unexpectedly sung by this family of three with a happy and cheerful taste. The dark sky hung low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you're with me. Insects fly, flowers sleep, pairs after pairs are beautiful. I'm not afraid of darkness, I'm only afraid of heartbreak. Chapter 327. It was a very ordinary birthday, but it was destined to be the most precious memory in the little girl's life. There was a gentle breeze by the lakeside, a lush green meadow, and a lush forest. The family of three lay lazily in the tent and fell asleep under the accompaniment of the starlight. It wasn't until the sun rose again that the little girl opened her eyes in a daze under the sunlight. The important birthday passed just like that, but her interest didn't seem to have waned at all. So, as soon as she got up, the little girl squatted by the lake and happily played with the lake water. Seeing this, Chen Shi took her to breathe the first breath of fresh morning air while doing exercises by the lake. Nian, Daddy will teach you how to do morning exercises, right? Okay. Good girl, then come over and stand behind me. I'll do one, you do another. 1 2 3 4, 2 2 3 4, very good. Next is body rotation exercise, walk. Chen Shi acted as a physical education teacher, standing by the lake and shouting slogans while doing standard movements. The little girl followed behind Chen Shi's butt, doing her best to twist her butt and shake her hands. That silly look looked very cute. As Chen Shi's magical slogan continued to ring out, many parents seemed to be infected by him. So, they brought their children behind them and started to do the radio calisthenics with the father and daughter pair. After finishing their morning exercises and eating breakfast, the family of three finally got on the car to return home. On the way back, Chen Shi played the role of a language teacher and gave the little girl an essay question. The question was, the most unforgettable day. The little girl was very interested in this question that was obviously out of the syllabus. So, Chen Shi told the little guy about the 6 essentials of writing, and under his patient guidance, the little guy was able to draw inferences about other things from one example, and successfully wrote the first essay of his life. The only regret was, Nian still didn't know how to write, so there was no way to write this essay on paper. However, Chen Shi believed that when Nian attended language classes in the future, this piece of, the most unforgettable day, would definitely become a model for her teacher's lectures. Under their tutelage, Nian would definitely become an excellent Chinese class representative in the future. In this regard, Chen Shi was full of confidence. It was a sunny afternoon in Hohai, a quiet and cozy little tea house. The leisurely days passed by slowly. Until this day, May 20th. Only half a month had passed since Nian's birthday. Logically speaking, with the dry summer weather, there should be very little fog in the morning. But today, he didn't know why. In the morning, as soon as the little girl opened the door, she saw a foggy scene, as if winter was coming. The thick fog obscured their vision. The little fellow stood outside the door of the west wing. When she raised her head, she couldn't even see the door of the east wing clearly. The visibility was at most 5 meters. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The fog cast a mysterious veil over the familiar things around him. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The whole sky was gloomy. In this regard, the little fellow was particularly excited. She actually played hide and seek with the big cat in the fog. The big cat circled around the courtyard, and the little fellow chased after it. Because she ran too fast, when she realized that there was someone in front of her, it was too late to stop. Thus, the little fellow fell into the arms of that person. Nian, run slower. Be careful not to fall. The little fellow looked up and found that she had fallen into Qin Yongyan's arms. She immediately opened her mouth and sweetly called, "Grandpa, good girl, go play." Qin Yongyan touched the little fellow's head, and then gently let go of her. After this period of cultivation, Qin Yongyan's cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. He was originally a master of gang strength, so when he refined all the genuine qi in his body into genuine essence, his cultivation smoothly reached the late stage of foundation establishment. He was only one step away from becoming a legendary celestial being. Qin Yongyan stood on the stairs outside the main hall and looked at the sky thoughtfully. Only then did he turn his head to look at the west wing. Then, he suddenly nodded in that direction, as if he was greeting someone. The little fellow continued to chase the big cat in the courtyard. Suddenly, a pair of big hands stretched out from the fog and directly picked up the naughty little fellow from the ground. "Nian, stop playing. It's time for breakfast." Xianxi's gentle voice rang in the little fellow's ears. So, the little fellow immediately put her arms around Xianxi's neck and said coquettishly, "Papa, I want to eat crystal shrimp dumplings." Didn't you say you wanted to eat soup dumplings today? No soup dumplings. I want crystal shrimp dumplings. Xianxi was obviously prepared for this little fellow who often changed her mind, so he pinched her nose and said with a smile, "I knew you would do this. Let's go. We have both. You can eat whichever you like, Papa is so nice." It was obvious that this sudden fog was a sign of the arrival of the heavenly anomaly. Just as Bai Hong had said, the gate of heaven would open again very soon. Xianxi didn't think too much about this. The gate of heaven opened for a limited time each time. Even if the people of Heaven Capital were determined to investigate, what could they find in such a short time? The village had been destroyed, and Bai Hong and her people were either dead or injured. They were still locked in the cave at the bottom of the sea. Everything that needed to be dealt with had already been arranged properly. Who would know that he was the one who did all this? What's more, even if they knew, what could they do? If a cultivator at the soul formation stage was determined to hide, it was definitely not so easy to find. Right now, Xianxi only wanted to live a low-key life, so when this fog appeared, he acted like he did a few days ago. He ate, slept, and acted as if everything had nothing to do with him. Therefore, after the family of three had breakfast, they prepared to open the tea house as usual. But just as they were about to walk out of the courtyard, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped. She frowned and looked a little uncomfortable. "Ying? What's wrong?" Xianxi immediately noticed Qin Ruoying's strangeness, so he hurried to her side and held her hand very nervously. "Nothing. I just felt a little dizzy just now. I'm fine now." Hearing this, Xianxi couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying with slight surprise. "Dizzy? What a joke. What's Ying's cultivation level? How could she feel dizzy?" At the thought of this, Xianxi immediately released a trace of true essence, and then carefully sorted out Qin Ruoying's physical condition. He didn't find any problems. But the more it was like this, the more worried Xianxi was. Ying could get sick. Xianxi's expression was a little uncertain. In order not to worry him, Qin Ruoying seriously felt her own situation, and then said with a smile, "It's really nothing. Maybe it's because I was a little absent-minded just now, so I felt like this. Now I'm fine." Qin Ruoying signaled Xianxi not to worry. At this time, the little fellow, who had already run out of the door with Xiao Yuan, turned her head and found that her parents didn't follow, so she quickly ran back. "Papa? What's wrong?" The little fellow looked at Xianxi in confusion. Seeing his dignified look, she carefully stretched out her small hand and pulled the corner of Xianxi's clothes. Xianxi was silent for a while, and then suddenly said to Xiao Yuan, "Xiao, you go and open the door first. Ying is a little uncomfortable today. I'll take her to the hospital." "Okay, boss, I'll go and open the door first." After Xiao Yuan left, Xianxi ignored Qin Ruoying's objection and took her directly back to the room. "Nian, Papa is going to check Mama's body." You watch cartoons by yourself first. When Papa is sure that Mama is fine, I'll take you to the tea house, okay? Okay. The little fellow nodded very sensibly, and then sat on the bed obediently. Seeing Qianxi's dignified look, Qin Ruoying gently squeezed his hand and said with a smile, I'm really fine. Hearing this, Qianxi directly interrupted her, and then said with a serious face, good girl, I'll check whether you're fine or not. Chapter 328. Some people could become a world-class superstar by playing football, while others could become an Olympic champion by diving. But if one wanted to reach the top of the world in something, it was definitely not something that could be achieved by hard work alone. Everything had to be about talent. Even when playing games, some people could reach the diamond rank after playing for 3 months, while others were still struggling in the silver rank after playing for 3 years. There were geniuses in all walks of life, but in this world, most of them were ordinary people who could not even compare to others in playing games. Qin Ruoying was such an ordinary person. At least, in terms of cultivation, she really did not have any outstanding points. So even with Qianxi, a soul formation expert, training with her all day long, Qin Ruoying's improvement was still so slow. With this kind of cultivation talent, if placed in the Sky Yen God sect, she might not even be as good as the most ordinary outer disciple, but there was no other way. Who asked her to have a strong background? Of course, poor aptitude was one thing, but no matter how bad Qin Ruoying was, she was still a cultivator who had stepped into the foundation establishment stage. Even martial artists could be immune to all kinds of diseases, let alone cultivators. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying said that she was a little dizzy, Qianxi's reaction was obviously a little overboard. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. Perhaps it was because Qin Ruoying had lost her Yin spirit previously, Qianxi now paid extra attention to any abnormal situation. For the sake of caution, Qianxi even used the amplification effect of the soul crystal, and carefully checked the situation of Qin Ruoying's soul. Qin Ruoying's Yin spirit had already returned, so no matter how Qianxi looked, he did not find any problems. Could it be, was it really like what Yingying said, because she was a little absent-minded just now, so she suddenly felt a little dizzy? Psychological effect? While Qianxi was depressed, the little fellow was secretly paying attention to his expression. As soon as she saw the expression on Qianxi's face slightly relax, this clever little thing eagerly came to his side, then hugged his arm and acted like a spoiled child. Papa, what's wrong with Mama? This silly child has learned how to read people's expressions. Seeing this, Qianxi pinched her little face and said with a smile, Mommy is fine. Let's go. I'll take you to the tea house to play with your brothers. All right. Since Qin Ruoying was indeed fine, Qianxi could naturally put down the big stone in his heart. When the family of 3 walked out of the west wing again, the thick fog in front of them still hadn't disappeared. The heavenly anomaly this time, could it have happened in Shangjing? Qianxi looked up at the sky and observed for a while. In the end, he did not want to go and investigate. Instead, he carried the little fellow and walked straight into the tea house. Whether it was the recovery of spirit energy or the opening of the heavenly gates, none of this had anything to do with Qianxi. Whether it was in the past or in the present, his ambition had never changed, and that was 30 mu of land, a cow, and a warm bed for his wife and children. Just a few simple sayings, but they were enough to describe the ideal life in his heart. While Qianxi was busy accompanying his wife and children, Siachen Glacier, Beiyao Temple. Qianxi had long guessed that someone might come to the Beiyao Temple to check the situation, so he removed the restrictions outside the temple long ago. At the top of the snowy mountain, the wind and snow seemed to never calm down for a moment. The mountain wind whistled past, mixed with bursts of snowflakes fluttering in the air. It was obviously a beautiful dynamic picture, but it gave people a sense of peace and tranquility. At this moment, it seemed that even time had stopped. In the wind and snow, 2 figures were particularly conspicuous, like 2 drops of ink on a piece of rice paper. One of them was relatively young, about 30 years old. The other person's hair and beard were all white, and he wore a green robe. he seemed to have a kind of sage-like charm. The young man was holding a bronze mirror in his hand, but the surface of this bronze mirror was dark. But there was something strange about it. There was a metallic luster flowing on the surface of the black mirror. From afar, this bronze mirror looked like a black hole, with a mysterious and wonderful beauty. Master, if the records of the divination pavilion are not wrong, the Beiyao temple should be here. The young man looked around, but under the wind and snow, what could he see except for the white snow? The snow had already drowned everything. The old man frowned and cast his gaze on a snowy area. Immediately after, he gently waved his sleeve, and an invisible force suddenly burst out. Like a stone smashing into water, the accumulated snow on the snowy ground immediately exploded and scattered in all directions, turning into snowflakes that fluttered in the air. Then, the old man waved his sleeve again, and a gust of wind suddenly blew in the air. In an instant, the snow that covered the sky and the sun was all blown to another mountain top. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. A black building suddenly appeared in the old man's line of sight. This unopened sacred hall was like a flower bud waiting to bloom, standing alone on the mountain peak. Seeing this, the young man immediately soared into the air and flew above the hall in the blink of an eye. He held the mirror and looked at the hall. Immediately, as if some mechanism had been activated, a series of ka-ka rotating sounds could be heard in the hall. Then, this black hall slowly bloomed under the young man's slightly bewildered eyes. This is the Beiyao temple? The young man landed in the center of the hall and carefully looked at the strange patterns on the floor. But just as he was curious about the things around him, the old man suddenly called out to him. "Wuxiu, there's no need to look. Let's go." Hearing this, the young man called Wuxiu immediately flew back to the old man's side, and then asked with a puzzled expression, "Master, what happened to this temple? The evil spirit has been destroyed, and the soul crystal has been lost. Without these two cores, the Beiyao temple can be considered to be completely destroyed. Is there no way to repair it?" "There's no way." The old man shook his head, then suddenly asked, "Wuxiu, carefully feel the aura here and see if you can sense anything." "Okay." After hearing the old man's words, the young man sat cross-legged in the air, held his breath, and carefully felt the surrounding spirit of heaven and earth. "Master, this place seems to have the aura of senior brother Baihong. He should have been here before, is that so?" After the old man glanced at the black lotus below, he waved his sleeve again. The wind and snow all over the sky suddenly surged. The old man did not use true essence to protect his body. Instead, he allowed the goose feather-like snow to continuously fall on his body. Therefore, in a short while, the old man's body was covered with a shallow layer of white snow. "They came in a hurry, and they left in a hurry. If I'm not wrong, they're probably dead by now, what?" Hearing this, the young man's face couldn't help but change drastically. He looked quite excited and asked, "There is still someone in the lower realm who can hurt senior brother?" "Why not? Moreover, are you so sure that the person who hurt them must be from the lower realm?" "Master, I don't understand what you mean. If you don't understand, think more." Seeing the old man's serious expression, the young man wisely shut his mouth. Then, the old man thoughtfully looked at the bronze mirror in the young man's hand. "Let's talk about this later. The most important thing now is how to deal with the prophecy left by the divine ancestor. The Beiyao temple is destroyed, and one of the 5 is missing. Perhaps the divine ancestor expected this to happen back then, so he left this soul mirror behind. Let's go to the All Saints Valley first. I hope nothing happened to the inheritance of Si Ming Xian Nu." Chapter 329. The heavy fog lasted for about 2 hours. Because such a heavy fog was so rare, CCTV even made a special report to analyze the reasons for the heavy fog in summer from all aspects. Chen Shi and Gu Lao were drinking tea while listening to the experts on TV blabber on and on. Experts analyzed many possibilities, but the final conclusion was still related to global warming, the greenhouse effect, and such terms that people were already familiar with. No matter what the situation was, as long as there was an abnormal climate, it was definitely due to environmental degradation. Therefore, the experts only repeatedly appealed on TV, hoping that people would spontaneously protect the environment and protect the common home of all mankind. Only a very small number of people knew, what did the appearance of the heaven and earth phenomenon mean? Although Qianxi was in the tea house, his mind was always outside the house. When the heavy fog dissipated, the hot summer sun once again shone on Hohai Old Street. Qianxi smiled and retracted his divine sense. The heavy fog dissipated, which meant that the gate of heaven was closed, and those people should naturally go back. This was undoubtedly good news for Qianxi. He was not afraid of them, he just didn't want to trouble them. After all, Qianxi had long passed the age of yelling and killing. Being able to quietly drink tea for a while was more appropriate for an old man like him. Qianxi and Gu Lao chatted about the recent abnormal weather. While they were chatting, Gu Lao seemed to be touched by something. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but sigh softly. The ancients said that whenever there is a heaven and earth phenomenon, something big must happen. Qianxi thought he was referring to the recent weather, so he smiled and didn't say anything. Gu Lao's mind drifted further and further. Before Qianxi could speak, he continued, I didn't see anything big, but recently, strange things have been happening one after another. Oh? Hearing this, Qianxi finally seemed to be interested, so he smiled and asked, what strange things have you encountered recently? Sigh, maybe it's because I'm old, so this old man is becoming more and more superstitious. Gu Lao smiled and shook his head. After looking at Qianxi thoughtfully, he sighed softly, there are some things that I've been keeping in my heart for a long time. Little Chen, I can see that you're not an ordinary person. If you're willing to listen, I can tell you about it. Just treat it as listening to an old man complain. Qianxi had known Gu Lao for some time, but he had never seen him show such an expression, so he immediately smiled and said, interesting, why don't you tell me about it first? Let me make this clear first. You youngsters should just treat this as a joke. Don't take it to heart, it's nothing, we're just chatting. Don't worry, I'm not a blabbermouth, alright, it's actually like this. Then, Gu Lao spoke of the things that had been buried in his heart all this time. The old man had never mentioned his family matters to Qianxi before, but he didn't expect to spill it all out this time. Gu Lao had a daughter, the mother of the two brothers, named Gu Yao. But what was regrettable was that, just when Qianxi moved from Zhonghai to Beijing with Nian, Gu Yao died in a car accident. Gu Lao used to live in his hometown in Jizhou. Because of Gu Yao's death, he returned to Hohai to take care of the two children for his daughter. In fact, Qianxi had already guessed that there might be something going on in Gu Lao's family. After all, if it was a normal family, how could an old man like Gu Lao take care of the children 365 days a year? And there were two of them at once, not to mention whether he had the energy or not. Didn't the children miss their parents at all? What about their parents? No matter how busy they were, there had to be a limit, right? The two brothers rarely mentioned their father, which meant that they didn't like their father. The children were still young, so Gu Lao could only lie to the two children that their mother had something to do abroad and would only come back once in a while. This excuse was just like how Auntie Zhang used to lie to Nian. But here was the strange thing, the reason why these two silly children didn't clamor for their mother was that Gu Yao often came back to see them. Moreover, the frequency of her coming back was obviously much higher than before. I buried Yao Yao with my own hands, in the back of the mountain in my hometown. One day after dinner, I was watching TV in the room, and the two of them suddenly ran to me and told me that their mother was back. You don't know, when I heard this sentence, my first reaction was that all the hair on my body stood up. Yao Yao is my daughter and their mother, so I believe that even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt me and the children. But you also know, there is a difference between humans and ghosts. How can humans stay with ghosts? So, since that happened, I took the children out every day until it was dark, because I was afraid that if they stayed with Yao Yao for too long, they would be infected with Yin energy. After hearing Gu Lao's strange words, Qianxi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, she couldn't help but interrupt him and ask, are you so sure that the child's mother has become a ghost? How can there be ghosts in this world? Have you seen one? Although I can't see it, the two of them can. Speaking of this, Gu Lao turned to the direction of the children's park and asked loudly, when was the last time your mother came back? The older brother was busy playing marbles with the little guy, so the one who answered was the younger brother. Yesterday. Mom just came back yesterday. After that, the younger brother immediately lay back on the cushion, because it was his turn to play. The three children played happily in the children's park, but Gu Lao could only shake his head and sigh. In this regard, Qianxia didn't know what to say. Ghosts. It's just a lingering spirit after death. From the perspective of immortal cultivators, the spirit was just a kind of pure and weak energy body, it couldn't even be called a life. Everything has a spirit, not only human beings will leave behind a spirit after death. If it's a spirit left behind by a living creature, it will retain some memories of its life, but it won't be more than 7 days. It's also because the spirit is pure enough that it's easier for the spirit to come into contact with the origin of all things, heaven and earth spiritual qi. Take a human as an example. If soon after a person's death, the spirit happens to float to a place with rich heaven and earth spiritual qi, then it's very likely that it will merge with the heaven and earth spiritual qi and exist in the world as a more powerful energy body. The spirit isn't scary, because they were just weak mortals, animals, or even plants when they were alive. A little bit of heaven and earth spiritual qi only provided them with a chance to continue to exist in the world. When the heaven and earth spiritual qi is exhausted, it's the time when they really disappear. This is the fundamental reason why there are so many ghost legends. But now the strange thing is, Gu Yao has been dead for more than half a year, but her spirit hasn't disappeared, and this. Chapter 330. Things like ghosts, in fact, they weren't as mysterious as the legend said. They were just a kind of energy body, so ordinary people couldn't see them at all. But if the ghost suddenly condensed too much energy for some unknown reason, it would cause the ghost's soul body to materialize. It was precisely because of this that ordinary people could see ghosts. Of course, this situation was extremely rare. In addition to this situation, there were a very small number of people who could directly see ghosts with their naked eyes. These kinds of people often appeared in folklore, yin-yang eyes. However, the yin-yang eyes wasn't very accurate. Immortal cultivators knew more than ordinary people, so from the perspective of immortal cultivators, the so-called yin-yang eyes was actually far more sensitive than ordinary people, so they could keenly detect signs of spiritual energy or yin energy fluctuations. These people were obviously good seedlings suitable for cultivation. Although Qianxia didn't specifically test the brothers' cultivation aptitude, the fact that they could see Gu Yao's ghost meant that the aptitude of these two brothers wouldn't be too bad. Although the seedlings were good, they weren't enough to arouse Qianxia's interest. What he was more concerned about was, it had been more than half a year, why hadn't Gu Yao's ghost dissipated? One had to know that the ghost of an ordinary person could only last for 7 days at most. Without the nourishment of the physical body, the soul was quite fragile. Even if the cultivation reached the golden core stage, as long as the yuanying hadn't been condensed, it was impossible to exist in the form of a soul for a long time. Qianxia was thinking about the reason why Gu Yao hadn't dissipated. Seeing that he had been silent, Gu Lao thought that Qianxia thought he was crazy, so he immediately shook his head and smiled. Forget it, just treat these things as gossip. Children's words carry no harm. Maybe it's because they miss their mother too much that they have such hallucinations, night talk in the city, ghosts, and monsters. These things had always been circulating in folklore, and Gu Lao didn't want this matter to make Qianxia feel uncomfortable. After all, even if Gu Yao became a ghost, she was still Gu Lao's biological daughter, so Gu Lao believed that Gu Yao wouldn't hurt him. Qianxia wasn't related to Gu Yao in any way. What if she was accidentally targeted by her? It was better for ordinary people to stay away from such strange things. What's more, Gu Yao had been appearing more and more frequently recently. Every time she appeared, although Gu Lao couldn't see it, he could clearly feel the change in the surrounding temperature. It was clearly a hot summer day, but the room seemed to be air-conditioned. Gu Lao was also worried about this matter, so he couldn't help but tell Qianxia about it. But as soon as he finished speaking, Gu Lao regretted it. It was best not to scare others when it came to their own matters. However, after listening to Gu Lao's words, Qianxi responded with a relaxed smile. Let's not talk about whether these things are superstitious or not, but I see that these two children are usually fine. There are no problems with their physical and mental health. Since it's been more than half a year, there shouldn't be any problems. You can think of it this way. Even if these things are just the children's illusions, at least these illusions can bring a certain degree of comfort to the two of them. Just treat it as a kind of spiritual sustenance. After all, the children are still young. They may not be able to accept the fact that their mother has passed away. When they grow up, you can tell them the truth. Maybe this way, it will be easier for them to accept it. Qianxi's words were very vague, but Gu Lao still understood the meaning of his words. Gu Yao had passed away for more than half a year. If she really wanted to hurt her children, something would have happened to these two children long ago. Now these two brothers were alive and kicking all day. It was probably because she loved her children that Gu Yao often returned to visit them. If he thought about it this way, it seemed to be acceptable. Thinking of this, Gu Lao couldn't help but look at Qianxi with a little surprise and asked doubtfully, "Aren't you afraid?" Afraid of what? This kind of bad luck, if I go back to my hometown and tell them, the people in the village will probably drive us out on the spot. The three of us won't be allowed to go back in this life. If you believe it, then it's true. If you don't believe it, then it's not true. I'm a good person, but I don't believe in evil, so this kind of thing will absolutely not scare me. Hearing this, Gu Lao's mood suddenly became much better. After taking a sip of the tea cup, a smile finally appeared on his face and he said, "That's good. I was worried that I would scare you. I won't have such good tea to drink in the future. You can rest assured. I'm one of the 5 good young men of the new era. I have Mao Gai, Ma Zhe, and Deng Luan to protect me. I have a 5-star red flag floating above my head and a party emblem hanging on my chest. I guarantee that all evil will be repelled and nothing will be able to invade me." Okay, let's see what you can do." After hearing Qianxi's words, Gu Lao couldn't help but laugh out loud, so he immediately changed the topic and asked with a smile, "Since you are so good, why don't you come to my place for a meal later?" In fact, Gu Lao didn't really want to invite Qianxi home for a meal. He just wanted to use this opportunity to take down his prestige. After all, the two were considered friends despite the difference in age, so they often made some harmless jokes. But what Gu Lao didn't expect was, Qianxi didn't seem to have used his brain to think. After hearing Gu Lao's words, he didn't back down. Instead, he immediately nodded and hurriedly responded, "Okay, I've always wanted to try your cooking. This time, I finally got the opportunity." Old Gu was stunned by Old Gu's eagerness. Gu Lao was stunned for a while, then he shook his head violently, and then said with a complicated expression, "Forget it, I'm just joking with you. In the future, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of? It's just a meal, it won't get in the way." No, I really can't, it's not safe." "What's not safe?" "It's broad daylight, you're still afraid of ghosts? How about this, I'll accompany you back to cook now. After it's done, I'll bring it here to eat. Is that okay?" "Hey, I say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you listen to my advice?" "Because I'm a party member." Hearing Qianxi's answer, Gu Lao almost choked to death. The two of them struggled for a long time over the matter of freeloading. In the end, Gu Lao couldn't persuade Qianxi, so he had to look at the time helplessly. It was now 3:30 in the afternoon. In fact, what Qianxi said also made sense. There shouldn't be any problems in broad daylight, so after hesitating for a while, Gu Lao reluctantly agreed to Qianxi's proposal. So, Qianxi immediately said goodbye to Qin Ruoying, then pulled Gu Lao out. Gu Lao's home was also near Hohai. It was less than 500 meters away from the tea house, but it had to circle around Hohai. On the way back, Gu Lao was still struggling whether to take him home. Seeing this, Qianxi immediately found a topic to divert Gu Lao's attention, so he pretended to be curious and asked, "Hey, by the way, where's the child's father?" Why haven't I heard you mention it to the child? As soon as these words came out, Gu Lao's face suddenly became a lot worse. Chapter 331. Heartless Man. After hearing this sentence, Xianxi's curiosity was suddenly aroused. Could it be those vulgar scenes of abandoning one's wife and children? However, this was someone else's family affair after all, and it was a scandal, so Xianxi couldn't ask further, so he wisely shut his mouth. This question obviously touched the old man's mind, so after Gu Lao was silent for a while, he sighed deeply and said, "At that time, not only was Yao Yao blind, but I was also blind." Then, Gu Lao frowned and talked about the past of Gu Yao and her husband. Gu Yao's husband was called Xia Kaiji, and the two were college classmates. Xia Kaiji's family condition wasn't very good, but he was ambitious. When others were playing basketball and playing games, he was immersed in studying all day. This kind of man was a typical phoenix man, commonly known as a golden phoenix that flew out of a chicken coop. Phoenix man was not a derogatory term, but because their shortcomings and strengths were equally conspicuous, they slowly left a bad impression in people's hearts. Hard work, diligence, self-discipline, these were all advantages. Because they suffered too much when they were young, most of them were far more mature than their peers, and they hoped to change everything through their own efforts. Just like what a female star said, "I'm from a rich family myself." The worse the family situation, the more eager they were to change through their own efforts. This also led to a very complicated mentality, inferiority and conceit at the same time. Back then, Gu Yao had been captivated by Xia Kaiji's maturity, which far surpassed that of his peers. But this kind of confidence and maturity often turned into shrewdness. Gu Lao wasn't the kind of person who had secular prejudice, so naturally, he didn't mind Xia Kaiji's poor birth, so after seeing Xia Kaiji a few times, the old man agreed to the relationship between the two. Xia Kaiji was indeed very hardworking. A few years after the two graduated, he became a senior executive in a large company, but with the gradual success of his career, some long-hidden problems gradually exposed. For Xia Kaiji, his career was always above everything. But for Gu Yao, family was the center of life. For this reason, the husband and wife, who were originally intimate, also had a gap. And with the birth of the twins, this gap was gradually widened. Gu Yao quit her job and stayed at home to take care of the child, but Xia Kaiji was nowhere to be seen all day. Finally, one day, Gu Yao had enough of living like a widow. So, after a big fight with Xia Kaiji, Gu Yao took the child and moved back to the old residence in Hohai. Perhaps it was because Xia Kaiji's career had indeed reached a critical juncture during that time, so he hadn't come to find Gu Yao. It was precisely because of this that the two of them had completely lost the chance to reconcile. By the time Xia Kaiji saw Gu Yao again, she was already lying quietly in the hospital morgue. He didn't even have time to look at Gu Yao before he was chased out by the furious Gu Lao. At this point, this unfortunate marriage had completely come to an end. The reason why Gu Lao scolded Xia Kaiji was because Xia Kaiji didn't take good care of Gu Yao, and because of the two children. After Gu Yao's death, Gu Lao felt that the responsibility was all on Xia Kaiji, so he firmly refused to let him raise the two children and refused to let Xia Kaiji see the children. After Xia Kaiji communicated with Gu Lao a few times, he had to let the old man do what he wanted because he didn't want to go to court with his father-in-law because of this matter. So, except for the living expenses that were sent to Gu Lao's account every month, Xia Kaiji completely disappeared from Gu Lao's sight. But the more it was like this, the angrier Gu Lao was. The reason why he didn't let Xia Kaiji see the children was that he wanted to embarrass Xia Kaiji a little as a punishment. But Xia Kaiji didn't even have the least sincerity. After being scolded by him a few times, he actually didn't come anymore. Little son of a bitch. Gu Lao cursed for the first time, and then he continued to hatefully, "The two children are so cute. He doesn't want them as a father, but I, as a grandfather, want them. And he even wants to send living expenses every month, bah. Does he think I care about his stinky money?" A few days ago, the agent called me and asked if I was selling this old house in Hohai. He said this old house is worth a lot of money now. Tomorrow, I'll go to the police station and change the surname of the two children. In the future, they will follow my surname, Gu. The more Gu Lao spoke, the angrier he became. It made Chen Shi, who started this topic, a little embarrassed. He really touched the pot that didn't boil. As a bystander, of course it wasn't good to comment on this kind of thing, so Chen Shi wisely shut his mouth and let Gu Lao vent his dissatisfaction in his ears. Although Gu Lao's house was close to the tea house in a straight line, it still took about 10 minutes to walk over. Most of the houses in the neighborhood were Sihiyuan, and Gu Lao's house was naturally no exception. It was just that it wasn't a dignified two-entry Sihiyuan like the Qin family. "We're here," Gu Lao complained all the way. When he really stood in front of the door, he seemed to have thought of something. He quickly turned his head and solemnly said to Chen Shi, "Little Chen, let me make it clear to you first. I can't make you happy with this kind of thing. Yao Yao's ghost may be inside. Are you sure you want to go in with me? Since we're already here, of course we have to go in and take a look. Not to mention there's a big sun above us. Even if there's a ghost, it's impossible for it to appear at this time, right?" After saying that, Chen Shi stretched out his hand and pointed at the sun in the sky. Gu Lao looked at his finger and was suddenly blinded by the sunlight. "Okay, then let's hurry up. When we're done, we'll bring it to the tea house to eat." Seeing that the sun was shining, Gu Lao finally felt relieved. He then took out the key and opened the door of the Sihiyuan. Then, Gu Lao walked into the courtyard with Chen Shi. For some reason, the moment Chen Shi stepped into the courtyard, the sun in the sky suddenly dimmed a lot, as if a dark cloud just happened to float over and cover the sun. Gu Lao led Chen Shi straight to the main hall, and then said to Chen Shi, "Sit anywhere you want, I'll go and pour you a cup of tea first. You're always the one who invites me to tea, this time it's finally my turn to invite you," Gu Lao said as he walked out of the main hall with a kettle. After he left, Chen Shi looked at the table in the center of the main hall with interest. There were fruits and candles on the table, and next to it was a guanyin statue. If Chen Shi guessed correctly, these tributes should be used by Gu Lao to worship Gu Yao. However, he didn't want the child to know that his mother had passed away, so he put a guanyin statue next to it. There was an armchair on both sides of the table. From beginning to end, Gu Lao didn't look at the person on the chair. But there was a person sitting there. A woman. The woman was wearing a set of very ordinary home clothes, sitting quietly on the old-fashioned wooden armchair. If one looked carefully, one would find that her skin was terrifyingly white as paper. It was estimated that even an albino was not as white as her. What was even more strange was that the woman's eyes were pitch black, as if ink had dripped into her eyes. Chen Shi turned his head and glanced at the woman, nodded politely at her, and then smiled and greeted her. Chapter 332. Chen Shi looked at the woman in the central room with a smile. It was actually a bit inaccurate to call her a woman. After all, Gu Yao had been dead for more than half a year, and her body had long decayed. How could she be considered a human now? She should be a female ghost. Chen Shi nodded toward the chair, and after a polite greeting, the expression on the woman's face changed slightly. She looked no different from a real person. Although her eye sockets were dark and she didn't even have eyeballs, there was still a hint of surprise in her eyes. The woman stared straight at Chen Shi. After a long while, she finally moved her lips slightly. Immediately afterward, the woman's voice suddenly sounded in Chen Shi's mind. "You saw me?" Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. That was interesting. It turned out that not only did Gu Yao's soul not dissipate, but for some unknown reason, she also preserved some memories of her life while stabilizing her soul body. No wonder Gu Yao had been staying with the twins, but the twins acted as if nothing had happened. It was because Gu Yao was their biological mother, so even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt her children. Chen Shi didn't answer Gu Yao's words. Instead, he stood in place and looked at her with interest. This kind of behavior was actually very impolite. Even animals had territorial consciousness, let alone ghosts. Therefore, after looking at Xianxia for a while, the darkness in Gu Yao's eye sockets became more and more intense. It was like boiling ink, as if it could splash out of the pot at any time. Sure enough. After a few breaths of time, Gu Yao slowly flew up from the chair in a very strange way, and then looked down at Xianxia condescendingly. If one looked carefully, they would find that Gu Yao's body was not very real. It was vaguely like a projection of a 3D holographic image. The candles in the central room were curled up with smoke. Perhaps because the lights in the room were not turned on, the originally kind Guan Yin statue seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow. It looked a bit ferocious and terrifying. Suddenly, a gust of chilly wind blew past, and the sound of leaves rustling could be heard from outside the house. The skies suddenly became a lot gloomier. It was dark and oppressive, as if a rainstorm could suddenly fall at any time. Leave. I won't kill you, Gu Yao's voice sounded again. However, after Xianxia heard her words, he gently shook his head, and then thoughtfully turned to look outside the house. After a person dies, the 7 spirits disperse first. Then, the heaven's soul returns to the heavens, the earth's soul returns to the earth, and the life soul enters the cycle of reincarnation. Ghosts were formed from earthly souls, so they lacked heavenly souls and life souls. Naturally, they could not have complete personalities and thoughts like they did when they were alive. Therefore, if one wishes to deal with ghosts, one must first treat them as if they were mentally retarded. They were easily angered and irritated. At the same time, they were extremely aggressive. They would chop people up in the middle of the street if they didn't agree with them. Xianxia didn't seem to realize what he was dealing with. Therefore, the moment Xianxia turned around to look outside, Gu Yao was completely enraged by his actions, and went completely berserk. Ah! Accompanied by an ear-piercing scream that pierced the depths of one's soul, a strong wind suddenly blew in the central room. Gu Yao's facial expression suddenly became particularly ferocious. Her head of black hair fluttered in the wind, and her pair of pupilless eyes were constantly oozing black blood. She was an evil ghost that had just crawled out of hell. However, Xianxia seemed to be unaware of anything, and continued to look outside the house. Gu Yao had already issued a warning, but Xianxia was not moved at all. Therefore, Gu Yao completely turned into a vengeful ghost, and fiercely pounced on Xianxia. Why would people be afraid of ghosts? It was because the two of them were not on the same level, and there was no way to fight back. An ordinary person holding a Guanyin bodhisattva from the night market, or chanting a few Amitabha, wanted to subdue an evil ghost with deep resentment. That was a plot that only existed in movies. Everything in the world had a spirit. From the moment Gu Yao turned into a ghost, she had already become a completely new life form. A life form that existed in the world in the form of energy, and was very fragile. Ghosts were more likely to come into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth than humans, so ordinary people could not deal with ghost attacks at all. This was because they had no idea how the ghosts were attacking them. And if humans also came into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and learned how to use it, then would ghosts still be a match for humans? It was like asking a mentally disabled person to fight with a normal person. How could the former win against the latter? Unless the latter was also mentally disabled. Xianxia was clearly not mentally disabled. Moreover, his understanding of the laws of heaven and earth was far beyond the imagination of ordinary immortal cultivators. Therefore, the moment Gu Yao pounced on Xianxia, it was as if she had crashed into a high-voltage electric net, and her entire body trembled violently. Chi! Perhaps because it was too painful, Gu Yao suddenly let out an ear-piercing scream, then suddenly turned into a cloud of gray smoke and flew back to the table in the central room at an even faster speed. Running? Seeing this, Xianxia smiled slightly, then took out the soul crystal and gently waved at the cloud of gray smoke. The gray smoke continued to churn and jump, as if it was still making its final struggle.